Chapter 725. In the command center, an old man stood in front of the window and looked at the fire in the distance. His facial expression kept changing under the light. A hurried voice came from the walkie-talkie on the table. "Commander, it's the Goodman Richard. We're in trouble." Another person behind him looked in the same direction with a pale face. Putting aside the deaths of hundreds of soldiers, the strike group composed of 3 aircraft carriers was currently conducting exercises nearby. The flagship of the 7th Fleet, an amphibious assault ship with a draft of 40,000 tons, had actually been blown up. This incident would definitely cause a huge uproar. Furthermore, there was no way to explain it. Could it be that it was done by one person in the base? Not to mention whether it was possible to say it. Even if it was said, would anyone believe it? How would the outside world view the 7th Fleet? Look, that's the 7th Fleet that was turned upside down by one person. Tens of thousands of soldiers couldn't even catch one person, and their flagship was blown up. The consequences of this incident made his heart tremble. The biggest possibility was that 2 scapegoats would be pushed out. For such a big incident, the status of the scapegoat couldn't be low. Otherwise, the public's anger wouldn't be appeased. He wasn't in the mood to worry about the person in front of him now. Instead, he started to worry about himself. In the end, the person in front of him would have to take the blame and resign, but his own fate would probably be even worse. Some scum in the army were dissatisfied with being punished by their superiors, so they colluded with terrorists and blew up the ammunition depot of the Goodman Richard. They even blew up a warehouse, the old man said slowly. The other person was stunned for a moment before reacting. If the military colluded with the outside world, it would make sense if that was the case. "Who are those scum?" he asked tentatively. "Find a few yellow-skinned people among the dead," the old man said. "Understood." The person nodded immediately. Yellow-skinned people in the army usually didn't interact with other people, so it wasn't easy for them to get into trouble. Furthermore, the other party was yellow-skinned, so they might be able to push the blame to the big country. As for the rest, it didn't matter. As long as there was an explanation that could convince the people, it would be fine. It didn't matter how the families of those people would react. Renbochin paddled with one hand and held his clothes with the other as he quietly crept ashore in the dark. This position was already very far away from where they were before, more than 20 kilometers away. It was already very close to the location of the Japan Self-Defense Forces. If he wanted to rush to the place he suspected to be the headquarters, he would have to travel at least 20 kilometers. A normal person would definitely not be able to run 20 kilometers from here and still be able to fight. The other party did not expect him to run so far, so the security here was much looser than in other places. However, Renbochin's speed was fast enough and his physical strength was good enough. If he ran 20 kilometers at full speed, it would only take him 15 minutes. This meant that his range of activity was far beyond their imagination. Furthermore, they didn't have enough manpower to conduct a carpet search of the entire base. As a result, they were led by the nose by Renbochin, who was hiding in the dark. Even though they had already treated him as a Superman, there were still many areas that they had overlooked. Now, they were all searching within a 10-kilometer radius of the previous ship, while he had avoided the main force and went straight for the vital point. 20 minutes later, when Renbochin was about to reach the target, he suddenly heard a burst of chaotic gunshots and screams. Renbochin was stunned. What was going on? Is there such a thing as blowing up a camp in the army? However, this could attract some attention. However, the next second, a rough voice almost made Renbochin, who was running at high speed, fall to the ground. "Ha ha ha ha, little bastards, Grandpa is here. F***ck. Renbochin was immediately confused. Why were the winged cavalry here? Which B**** let them come? Now that someone had come to rescue him, his first reaction wasn't joy, but curses. He was the only one who could fight and leave as he pleased. With the addition of this group of B** stars, he immediately became a bigger target. However, they should have been contacted by Yang. Senator Yang Sin should have arranged for someone to receive them, right? Even if someone came to receive them, this was still the base of the 7th Fleet, and there were more than 10,000 soldiers with live ammunition going crazy there. Renbochin rushed to the front and directly barged in through a window. He ran into the corridor and happened to see more than a dozen soldiers holding guns and wildly spraying bullets at an empty area. A black soldier sensed something and turned his head to see a cold star getting bigger and bigger. Plop! More than a dozen corpses fell to the ground one after another. Someone popped his head out from the corner and was stunned when he saw Renbochin. Then, he revealed an ecstatic expression and leaned out from behind the corner. Mr. Ren. You are. Renbochin guessed that they were sent by Yang Senior, Lady Boss. 5 or 6 burly men rushed out from the corner and grinned. They said you were here, and we found you. Otherwise, Her Majesty would have skinned us. Mr. Ren, I was ordered to come and receive you. A tall soldier in ordinary camouflage clothes with a face that looked like it was carved out of stone stepped forward with a gun in his hand. Well, why did you attack here? Renbochin raised a question. This is their headquarters. We wanted to capture 2 high-ranking officials and get them to release you. Otherwise, we won't be able to rescue Sir Ren in such a big base. It's good that it's their headquarters. Renbochin was relieved after getting the answer he wanted. If I wanted to leave, I would have left long ago. Or rather, I let them capture me on purpose. Originally, it was convenient for me to stay and leave whenever I wanted, but with you guys around, I would be a bigger target. How did you arrange for the rescue? The rescue is outside. We have to rush out, the soldier immediately said. You guys leave first. You can also attract some of their attention. I will go up and take a look, Renbochin said. We can't leave until Mr. Ren leaves. The order we received was to take Mr. Ren away, the soldier said solemnly. Renbochin's face darkened. You guys aren't of any help to me now. Instead, you are a burden. He could tell that these soldiers were at the manual level and should be the top fighting force in the country. Their reaction speed were far beyond that of ordinary people. In addition, they used firearms as weapons and might be able to fight against dozens of people at the same time. The problem was that there were tens of thousands of people outside. Furthermore, they had heavy firearms. Renbochin's face darkened, but he was still somewhat imposing, making the soldier feel as if he was looking at a superior. However, the soldier still insisted, we will leave with Mr. Ren. If we can't leave, we will stay behind to attract the enemy's firepower. Mr. Ren will take advantage of the chaos to leave. Renbochin was so angry that he almost laughed. However, the soldier's last sentence made him feel a little emotional. This was probably what a soldier was like. Looking at those cheeky idiots at the side, he wondered why there was such a big difference in their behavior. Do you guys have a way to leave under the siege of more than 10,000 soldiers? Renbochin asked. No. However, since Mr. Ren has been able to cause trouble at this base for so long without being caught, you should be able to leave by yourself. Also, these few people are very powerful and should be able to leave as well. As for us, you don't have to worry about us, the soldier said word by word. Renbochin seemed to see some kind of radiance on his stone-like face. The determination of a soldier who was willing to sacrifice for his orders softened Renbochin's heart. What's your name? Renbochin asked. Base 637, Captain Shi Guanglong. The soldier saluted. What about you guys? Zhang Jihua. Xue Ping. Wang Gang. Qin Zhe. Renbochin felt that something was mixed in. There are a total of 11 of us. Including them, there are a total of 23 people. There are also some people guarding outside, Mr. Ren. Ren Baqian looked up. So close, yet so far. He was already so close. As long as he had 10 more minutes, he would be able to capture the commander of this base and create a big piece of news. However, 10 more minutes would be enough for the enemy's reinforcements to surround this place tightly. Let's go and rush out, Ren Baqian said as he looked at everyone. Although he was becoming more and more indifferent to life, he didn't want to see these people die here. In the end, he was inexplicably moved by those two sentences. Although he had already created a big firework, he still felt a little regretful that it ended like this. Thank you. Shi Guanglong saluted again. After meeting up with the group outside, he didn't have time to say anything else and directly rushed back the way he came. The journey could be considered smooth. After all, these soldiers were at the manual level. With the winged cavalry leading the way, only a few of them were pierced through. The main reason was that when they were attacked, the soldiers would strategically find cover, and the winged cavalry would usually jump over with their sabers. If the situation was different, they might be able to restrain themselves. However, at this moment, these winged cavalry warriors looked at their comrades and felt their blood rush to their heads. Firearms. Weren't these things similar to Great Xiao's crossbow battalion? They had already rushed past the crossbow battalion, and their numbers were much greater than the enemy's. In any case, he was going all out. Even if the bird didn't die, it wouldn't die for tens of thousands of years. Ren Baqian roamed in the dark, using the metal chain and his honed assassination skills to quickly resolve a lot of problems. Otherwise, these winged cavalry warriors would have been reduced in number. Chapter 726. After leaving Zhou Shibao's base, the evacuation route wasn't easy. The U.S. military reacted crazily, and helicopters circled the northern part of Nagasaki all night long. They didn't know what benefits they had promised, but the self-defense forces and police also set up checkpoints. Relying on Ren Baqian's extraordinary perception, they arrived at a previously prepared hiding spot. Wait here first. It's still safe here, and they can't keep searching so wantonly. After these 2 days, I'll find an opportunity to send you guys away. I'll send some food over later. You guys can rest first, the person who brought them here said. Ren Baqian and the others didn't ask for the other party's identity. They could only listen to his arrangements in the current situation. He only said, send more food. It would be best if there's enough for 100 people. After all, everyone present was a big eater. The appetite of those soldiers probably wasn't small either. Ren Baqian and the others were in the basement of a building. Separated by a wall was the parking lot, and outside was the city. According to his plan, if they were really discovered, such an environment would be enough for them to cause a ruckus. Then, he would bring a few people back to Dao. Then, he would bring the Empress and Lin Chaola back to avenge them. With the Empress and Lin Chaola around, no target could escape. After the other party left, everyone quietened down. This was a space of about 100 square meters, which could fit more than 20 people. Even though the ventilation system was good, it became stuffy with so many people crammed in. Take a seat and wait. Ren Baqian looked for a corner. After a day, he was very tired. Previously at the base, it was as if he was on steroids. Now that he was in a different environment, he was overwhelmed with fatigue. There was also hunger. The last time he ate was when he found some compressed rations and canned food on that ship. Although it hadn't been much time since then, he was already very hungry, and his stomach was tossing and turning. Whether it was traveling at high speed or fighting, he consumed too much energy. Ren Baqian sat there to rest, and the others also sat down. The winged cavalry warriors took out first aid kits and bandaged the wounds of a few unlucky fellows. Their chests and stomachs had been shot a few times, but the bullets had already been squeezed out with the movement of their muscles. The bleeding had already stopped, and there wasn't much point in bandaging them. As for the soldiers, they glanced over from time to size him up. He looked to be in his 20s and was very strong. There was a strong smell of blood on his body. He was not very handsome, but he was in line with the aesthetic standards of the military. When he closed his eyes and kept a straight face, he looked very dignified. It was this person who persisted for an entire afternoon and night under the pursuit of tens of thousands of people. Not only did he kill a lot of people from the other side, but he also blew up one of the other side's warships. He could be said to be a peerless, ferocious man. People in the army admired those with strength. These people usually felt good about themselves. Even 100 ordinary people would not be a match for them. If it wasn't for the fact that the country didn't allow it, they could have broken most of the records if they participated in the Olympics. However, the things that the other party had done were still things that he couldn't do. He didn't even dare to imagine. Other than a peerless, ferocious person, he couldn't think of any other name that would be more appropriate. And that spear of his spear technique was much more brilliant than the spear experts he had seen in the army. He didn't know where such an expert came from. And those burly men, are they his subordinates? Each and every one of them was an expert that others could only look up to. According to the current classification of strength in the army, they were at least one level higher than him and the others, right? Could it be that the current training method had something to do with them? Otherwise, it was impossible for them to be so strong. Not long after, two burly men walked up to Rinpoche awkwardly and said, "Lady boss, it's our fault. It's up to you to beat or kill us later." It was these two men's carelessness that resulted in Rinpoche being captured and losing all his face. Rinpoche rolled his eyes and said, "Get lost. Do you think I'm as stupid as you two? I deliberately pretended to be unconscious and was brought here by them to teach them a lesson so that they wouldn't keep thinking about me every day. In the end, you bunch of idiots came here to mess things up." "Oh, you did it on purpose." The two men immediately relaxed after hearing this. "Just as I said, with the lady boss's strength, how could she be captured?" Rinpoche rolled his eyes. Both of them were tricked, and his strength was similar to theirs. Why couldn't he be captured? However, now wasn't the time to teach these two idiots a lesson. He waved his hands like he was swatting flies to chase them away. The dozens of soldiers looked at him with admiration. He was indeed a peerless, ferocious man. If they hadn't come, he might have been able to do it. As the Nyen nation became more and more powerful, those bastards from the United States had been looking for trouble over the past few years. After being messed around by Rinpoche, everyone felt relieved. Afterward, everyone lowered their voices and rested. The winged cavalry warriors took off their clothes and slept soundly with their upper bodies bare. When someone woke up and spoke loudly, they immediately became well-behaved after being reprimanded by Rinpoche. Previously, Rinpoche's strength was low, and they were relatively bold. Now, even though Rinpoche's strength wasn't comparable to theirs, it wasn't too far off. In particular, along the way, Rinpoche's attacks were decisive, ruthless, and extremely fast. He was the type of opponent that they hated the most. As a result, they were much more well-behaved when facing Rinpoche. It wasn't until daybreak that the sound of cars stopping outside could be heard before the man brought in water and food. It wasn't for 100 people, but only for 50 people, and it was enough to fill a few boxes. "Mr. Ren." Shi Guanglong asked someone to bring in food for 5 people. They also practiced martial arts and naturally understood that the stronger one was, the more food they would eat. Rinpoche and the winged cavalry warriors ate the most. They only kept one portion for each person and distributed the rest to Rinpoche and the rest. After waiting for 3 days in a row, the other party finally informed them that they could be sent off. A few hours later, Rinpoche finally set foot on China's soil. "You are finally back. I can finally rest assured, Yang Sen said as soon as he saw Renbochin. He had been very anxious for the past few days. If anything happened to Renbochin, the nation wouldn't be able to bear the loss. However, seeing that nothing happened to Renbochin and thinking about the news that he had received, he was shocked. Was this a true expert? One person was able to stir up such a huge storm and come out unscathed. When would we be able to train such an expert ourselves? At that time, let's see which country would still dare to cause trouble for China. Although China had already surpassed the United States to become the world's largest economy, its international status was still inferior to the United States, especially in terms of military strength. Otherwise, how would the other party dare to conduct military exercises in the South repeatedly? If they could train a group of such experts themselves, the future would be really exciting. There's nothing to worry about. This isn't a problem for me. Originally, I was going to teach them a lesson, but I didn't expect you to send so many people. It's inconvenient to make a big target, Renbochin said calmly. You have already taught them a lesson. This time, they hate you to the core. Yang Sen smiled and gave him a thumbs up. The good guy Richard, the flagship of the 7th Fleet, was actually blown up by you. Even I was shocked. If they were 10 minutes later, you would still be seeing the head of the commander of the 7th Fleet. Renbochin said regretfully. Ha! Yang Sen laughed dryly. If that was the case, the United States would definitely shed all pretense of cordiality. A 4-star general was killed in the base, and the United States definitely wouldn't tolerate this. It was good that things had turned out this way. Not only did he teach them a lesson, but he could also force them to swallow their anger. Mr. Ren, I'm afraid you won't be able to go abroad in the future, and it's best for you to live in seclusion during this period of time, Yang Sen said as he thought of something. I can understand if you can't go abroad. Why do you live in seclusion? Can they still affect the country? Renbochin asked. The United States has issued an arrest warrant. They claim that some soldiers in the army were reprimanded by their superiors and held a grudge for other reasons. As a result, they were bribed by Mr. Ren. While some of them were creating disturbances, others blew up a warehouse and the ammunition compartment of the good guy Richard, causing the warship to explode in the harbor. They really dare to say that? Renbochin was speechless. Sure enough, they definitely didn't dare to say that he was the one who turned them upside down. Furthermore, the list of those who colluded with Mr. Ren that they released were the soldiers who died when Mr. Ren caused havoc in the base. There were a total of 14 of them, and they were all Chinese. They risked their lives for them, and now, they have to bear the stigma. Yang Sen sighed slightly. Although they were the enemy, they were also Chinese. These people actually didn't make any mistakes, but they suffered such a thing. Just thinking about it made people feel regretful. When Renbochin killed them, he didn't care whether they were Chinese or not. In any case, they were all enemies and he had to kill them. Now that he heard this news, he felt a little angry. It was a feeling of righteous indignation. He thought about how he was a firm believer in the past. After saying this news, Yang Sen changed to a relaxed tone and said, now that the other party has issued an arrest warrant, Mr. Ren, you won't be disturbed in the country, and the country also monitors foreign news. However, there are always some things that can't be monitored, and Mr. Ren's identity can easily be exposed. If Mr. Ren wants to have plastic surgery, as long as you make some slight adjustments, I think you can be unrecognizable. Our techniques are very good. Can I look like Wu Yanzu? Renbochin asked. I have to ask an expert about this, but there shouldn't be a problem. Yang Sen laughed. In that case, help me ask. Renbochin laughed. Of course, this was pure nonsense. If he were to look like Wu Yanzu, the Empress would probably beat him up until he looked like Guo Digang. The Empress wouldn't be able to accept him suddenly changing his appearance. Also, the elder that you video chatted with previously wants to meet you. Yang Sen only brought up the matter at hand after laughing. All right. The time will be half a month from now. Ren Baqian nodded. Although he didn't know the reason why that elder wanted to meet him, it was probably related to this matter. It was necessary for Ren Baqian to meet him. At this time, Ren Baqian still didn't know that the impact of this matter was actually greater than what Yang Sen had said. After all, the flagship of the 7th Fleet had been blown up, and thousands of soldiers had been sacrificed in their own base. This matter couldn't be suppressed no matter how hard they tried. Tens of thousands of people protested in various cities in the United States, and the Congress held several successive meetings. Even the president, who was doing things his own way, was severely questioned. The whole world was paying attention to this matter. Countless countries were investigating the details of this matter. Even though the people at the base had already issued a gag order, with the efforts of various countries, the layer of mystery was gradually revealed. Chapter 727. In a certain empire where the sun never sets. Did he do it alone? Are you sure about this report? A man looked at the report about the 7th Fleet's riot and asked. Yes, from the information we received, it's true. Although I'm also very skeptical, there's only one truth after eliminating all the impossibilities, the middle-aged man in front of him said seriously as he pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Put this report here first and continue to investigate. I want to know the specific situation of this person. A certain fighting nation. Although I'm very happy that our archenemy is in a terrible fix, I want to know more about this matter than this report that seems more like an alien invasion of Earth. The maverick president of the United States could be said to be in a terrible fix for the past 2 days. The Congress needed him to give an explanation, and the people behind him were also urging him to do so. The temptation of this biochemical technology was too great. However, after this failure, China would definitely be more vigilant than before. It would be very difficult to take action again. When Ren Baqian bade farewell to Yang Sen, he specially looked for Shi Guanglong and the others. If you have nowhere to go after retiring, you can look for me. I have martial arts that will allow you to advance further, Ren Baqian said to them. If there is such a day. Shi Guanglong and the others didn't seem to take it to heart. They knew very well that they would probably never leave the army in this lifetime. However, Ren Baqian's last sentence confirmed Shi Guanglong and the rest's judgment. Those martial arts were indeed related to him. Yang Sen's expression changed slightly behind Ren Baqian. He didn't expect Ren Baqian to take a fancy to these people. He had to consider whether to send these people to Ren Baqian's side. It might be a good opportunity. However, he was a little reluctant to do so. Although these people weren't the most talented, they were still the cream of the crop. They were the seed selected from the millions of soldiers. This matter couldn't be rushed. It was better to think about it carefully. Although he was confident in the loyalty of these people, since they dared to say it publicly, he didn't know what methods they had. If they didn't return in the end, the loss wouldn't be small. After speaking to them, Ren Baqian bid farewell to Yang Sen, returned to the villa, and had a big meal before preparing to return to Deo. Just as he was about to leave in the Empress's carriage, a crimson shadow suddenly pierced into his arms like lightning. As the surrounding environment changed, the crimson shadow turned into a stream of light and rushed into the distance. During this time, a red figure suddenly tried to stop him, but he still missed. The Empress landed resentfully from the sky. That little thing was too fast. First, she looked at Ren Baqian with an unfriendly expression. This was the guy who had stolen her imperial carriage. However, after seeing Ren Baqian's appearance, she let out a soft cry of surprise. What happened to you? The Empress immediately noticed the changes in his body. The thick smell of blood and the biting cold murderous aura on his body could not be concealed. This was a smell that Rinpoche didn't have before. The Empress immediately knew that Rinpoche was in trouble. The stench of blood on his body was so strong that it was not from killing 1 or 2 people. At least 100 people. I was targeted and careless. Rinpoche smiled casually. He sat in the Empress's carriage and lazily asked, "Is there anything to eat? I've been starving these days." Even though he had eaten for half a day on Earth before returning, he felt that only the food in this world could truly fill him up. In the past, he always felt that not being full was a kind of happiness. He could continue to eat and eat all kinds of delicacies. Now, he realized that it was actually not as good as he thought. Even when he was eating, hunger always haunted him. If there was anything in this world that made people suffer the most, it would probably be hunger. The Empress first asked someone to prepare food for Rinpoche. Following which, she asked Hong Yuan to bring out some wine and asked the surrounding people to stay away. Then, she sat opposite Rinpoche, bent her legs, and said, "Tell me about it." Rinpoche smiled and told the Empress about what happened. He emphasized on his bravery, how he went in and out of the tens of thousands of armed soldiers and killed the enemies until they trembled with fear. When he was done, he stretched out his hand and a spear appeared in his palm. This golden spear and the metal chain really contributed a lot. This time, I have gained a lot from this golden spear. This can be considered a blessing in disguise, the Empress said faintly. Following which, she frowned and faintly sighed. Even though I also hope that you can make some progress, it's better to avoid such things. Looking at your current appearance, even though you look sharp, I feel a little heartache. Being in the midst of the enemy, a little carelessness will lead to infinite danger. Previously, you were the one who showed me the video of the atomic bomb. This time, they didn't know your strength and didn't prepare well. Next time, you might not be so lucky. Even without the atomic bomb, as long as you are more prepared, it will be difficult for you to escape unscathed this time. Rinpoche nodded. What the Empress said was the truth. He was also clear in his heart. No matter what, he was just a single person. If the other party wanted to take him down, as long as they dragged on for 2 days, he would be in danger. I have caused your Majesty to worry about me. The Empress looked at him with flickering eyes and continued, "Previously, I thought that your nation could protect you. Now, it seems that it isn't as easy as I thought. Your world is different from this one. It is impossible for the nation to go into seclusion and prohibit people from coming and going. No matter how strict the checks are, there will always be loopholes. Previously, it was still fine because there were people who helped you cover up. But now that you have exposed the things that you have, I am afraid that many countries will target you. After all, the things that you have are too valuable to them. If it were me, I would also be tempted. No matter how strict the security of your nation is, it is only in private and cannot prevent so many people from eyeing you. Also, I am not always by your side. I am afraid that there will be more problems in the future. I was rash. I only thought that the things that I have grasped will be valued by the nation. Now that such a thing has happened, I am afraid that I will be looked down upon by others and there will be more troubles in the future." Rinpoche understood. Previously, with the nation covering up, only one country had their eyes on him. But after this incident, he was afraid that it would no longer be covered up. In the future, the ones who would be watching him wouldn't just be the United States. The Empress drank another cup of wine, slowly deliberated and said, "Your concerns are not wrong. You will indeed be looked down upon by others, but it won't be appropriate if you do nothing. Even though I don't know much about your nation, I can tell from those television dramas that internal strife happens from time to time. It is very different from Dayo. If you are looked down upon by others, there will be many people who have designs on you in the future." Upon hearing this, Rinpoche let go of his worries and laughed carefreely. "In that case, I can't hide no matter what. Therefore, what you did this time isn't necessarily wrong. At least for the time being, there is a place that can shelter you from the wind and rain. In some aspects, the interests of you and your nation are aligned. Unfortunately, your nation is willing but unable to deal with the troubles in the future. Unless you hide, no matter what they do, they can only shield you from most of the troubles. I am afraid that you still have to rely on yourself for those that are truly well prepared. I have learned a saying from television dramas: you can be a thief for 1,000 days, but you can't guard against thieves for 1,000 days. No matter how much you guard against them, it is impossible to guard against them all. This is also unavoidable. Fortunately, I still have some ability to protect myself. Ren Bachyan laughed. He was definitely not willing to hide it. The Empress paused for a moment, looked at Ren Bachyan for a long time, and then said, "There are some things that I have wanted to say for a long time. It is just that you have grown up over there and have feelings in your heart. I also don't want to make you unhappy. Please speak, Your Majesty." Ren Bachyan sat upright. It was rare for the Empress to say these things to him. The Empress first poured herself a cup of wine, drank it in one gulp, poured another cup, and then pushed the wine pot to Ren Bachyan. After both of them raised their cups and drank together, the Empress said. Chapter 728. The Empress had never spent so much effort on a single person in her entire life. No one would believe that the Empress of Deo, the fifth most powerful expert in the world, not many people knew that Tingyu was dead, would actually spend so much effort on a man. She even kept some words in her heart and didn't say them until now. She was just like the children in the marketplace. The time in Deo is different from the time on Earth, the Empress said. Ren Bachyan laughed and said, "Your Majesty, you found out. 1 day in Deo is 3 days on Earth. Although the passage of time feels the same, the time in the two worlds is different." The Empress raised her eyes and rebuked, "Do you think I'm a fool? How could I not know? It's just that I don't know what the time in the two worlds is like. Just like what the journey to the west said, 1 day in heaven is equivalent to 1 year on Earth. Who knows? That's why I didn't tell you." "How can that be? Your Majesty is wise and resourceful. Whoever treats you as a fool is the fool." Ren Bachyan laughed when he saw the Empress's expression. The Empress looked at Ren Bachyan and said faintly, "It's indeed different. Although you used to laugh, you didn't have such vigor. Do you think it's good or bad, Your Majesty?" Ren Bachyan asked with a smile. "As I said, it looks good. It's just that the things behind it make my heart ache." The Empress sighed again. "To be able to make Your Majesty feel sorry for me, I feel very carefree. This is the most carefree thing in my life. Who else in the world can be like me?" Ren Bachyan laughed again. The Empress said faintly, "You are the best at saying nice things." She stopped Ren Bachyan from speaking and said, "I sighed more today than I did in the past 20 years. Let's continue from before. 1 day in Deo is 3 days on Earth. Do you know how long your lifespan is? You are at least 100 years old now. If you become a spirit will expert, you will be 150 years old, which is 450 years on Earth." "It's 300 years, Ren Bachyan corrected. "I also have to spend some time on Earth. If my lifespan is 150 years, half of my time in Deo and half of my time on Earth will be 75 years in Deo. In fact, now that I have more autonomy, I can spend more time in Deo and reduce the passage of time for myself. Perhaps I can stay in Deo for 100 years, which is equivalent to 300 years on Earth. I won't let you die so much earlier than I do. I'll think of something when the time comes." The jade embryo that the General-in-Chief who supports the nation presented to me was obtained from the 60,000 mountains. It can extend your life by at least 20 years. Furthermore, your path doesn't stop at the spirit will level. Your martial arts are special. Even though it's somewhat dangerous to cultivate, it'll be a smooth journey once you get through it. Even though it will cost a lot of treasures, there are many treasures in the 60,000 mountains. No matter how much I have to pay, I will push you to the land of the creation of heaven and earth. That will give you at least 220 years of life. After that, I will think of other ways. Then, he said angrily, don't interrupt me all the time, you're interrupting what I want to say. The rulers of the countries on earth were not inherited from father to son. They would change every 8 to 10 years. Although their influence could be extended, it would eventually decline. Especially after a few decades and a few generations of rulers, as their strength increased, some things would be forgotten, whether intentionally or unintentionally. The agreement with you would no longer be valid. In my opinion, you would have to part ways sooner or later. You knew this clearly, so you made arrangements. However, in my opinion, it was still too petty. Or rather, you were considerate, so everything was passive. You gave the initiative to them and gave them the opportunity to have other ideas. Martial arts are nothing in this world, but they're extremely precious in your world. If I were to do it, I would announce everything to the public. If your countries want it, you have to satisfy me. If someone doesn't do as I say and dares to have other ideas, I will naturally let him know what regret is. If I want to kill someone, no one can stop me. After that, I will exclude this country. There will be threats and temptations, and no one will dare to have other ideas. There are so many countries, and it's impossible for them to be united. When the time comes, there will naturally be people who will draw closer. In fact, it's fine as long as these things are announced. When some countries get what they want, the others will set their sights on those countries. It doesn't matter whether it's an exchange of benefits or something else. The main thing is that once these things are announced, no one will take the risk to find trouble with you. It won't be like now, where as long as one country gets it, the other countries will have to get it. Otherwise, they will fall behind, and no one will be able to accept this. In the end, you will become a target yourself. Your Majesty, you are right. I was born and raised here, and there are some things I can't do because of our ties. Renbochin smiled bitterly. That's why I said that you are considerate and put yourself in this situation. Things will become like this sooner or later, and it's just a matter of time. Even if it's not this time, it will be the next time, or the time after that. There's another reason why I said that you are petty. Since it will be like this sooner or later, your arrangements are too weak. What can a dozen winged cavalry warriors do? Even as a deterrent, it's far from enough. It's just a small fight. If you mention it to me, I will give you 1,000 Kismet Heaven experts and divide them into several groups to bring back. Even if it takes a long time, it will only take about 100 groups of 7 people each time. It won't even take a year. With these 1,000 Kismet Heaven experts, you can find people to train according to the army of your world. With such a group of people, even if they are only used for self-defense, who will dare to act rashly? With this strength, you can attack and retreat at will. At this time, your country is asking for your help. If you bring 1,000 Kismet Heaven experts back, they won't be able to do anything. At most, they will make an agreement with you. At that time, if they really have other thoughts, they will have to think twice. If anyone dares to act rashly, my brave warriors will let them know how to write the word aboriginals. At this moment, the Empress's face was radiant, and she was in high spirits. Her entire body was filled with confidence and dominance. Renbochin imagined the scene of the heads of the various countries being pressed by the aboriginals and forced to write the word aboriginals. That scene was really beautiful. Then, he smiled bitterly. The Empress was right. He was still too worried. The Empress seemed to see through his thoughts and continued, "It doesn't matter if you have concerns about this matter. You have to know that these arrangements are only for deterrence and self-defense. If others don't make a move, everything will be fine and everyone will mind their own business. If others raise their sabers, will you still be able to shrink your neck? These arrangements are the sabers to counterattack. However, there are currently less than 700 winged cavalry warriors. Renbochin kept smiling bitterly. It's just that we couldn't afford to support too many of these winged cavalry warriors previously. The imperial court isn't wealthy and has to support 90,000 soldiers. How can we support too many Kismet Heaven experts? When we arrive at the 60,000 mountains, I will let you see how the aboriginal men can fight with those beasts in the mountains. What you see is more than what you see. At present, the soldiers in the army are recruited from the periphery of the 60,000 mountains. Their living environment isn't that bad, and their strength is relatively low. The brave warriors in the depths of the 60,000 mountains are the true elites of the aboriginals. They are fierce and powerful. It's not impossible that we don't have people who are as powerful as the officials in the imperial court. When the late emperor led the army to sweep the Han nation, many of the fierce warriors in the depths of the mountains joined the army. If you want, not to mention 1,000, even if it's 2,000 or 3,000, I can also provide you. Let me think about it carefully, Renbochin said. It would be easy to bring back 20 people as bodyguards, and the nation wouldn't care too much. If he brought back 1,000 fiercer aboriginal elites, many people would be worried. However, this was also the Empress's goal. These words made him feel that even though the Empress liked to use her hands more than her brain, she was, after all, the Empress of Dayo and could see the overall situation far better than ordinary people. Even though she didn't know much about Earth, she was very clear about this matter and couldn't refute her words. Renbochin suppressed this thought, looked at the Empress, and said, "Your Majesty's charm is really captivating, and I can't wait for the wedding." The Empress retracted her spirited expression and leaned back against the wall of the imperial carriage. She looked slightly unnatural and asked, "Great attendant said that you want me to marry you?" Renbochin let go of his thoughts and laughed. "Your betrothal is too fierce, and I can't beat them. They will either drug or poison me, and it won't look good for anyone who gets poisoned. Why don't your Majesty marry me? I definitely won't resist. Women in our world need dowry when they get married. What's your dowry?" The Empress looked slightly shy, and the domineering look she had when she spoke just now was completely gone. She looked like a little girl. Renbochin slowly said, "I'll grant you the kind of world you want, a world full of flowers and brocade." The Empress softly repeated it a few times, and her expression changed. She felt that this sentence from Renbochin was enough for her to put in so much effort. It wasn't for this world, but for herself. Chapter 729. Renbochin leaped from the branch and landed on another tree in less than a second. He didn't make much noise during this process. As soon as he steadied himself, he opened his arms wide and leaned backward. Then, he descended head first. In mid-air, a long spear appeared in his hand, and he thrust it at the huge leopard with a single horn. The leopard, which had been searching for Renbochin and seemed to have lost track of him, revealed a cunning and cruel look. It suddenly turned around and climbed up the tree trunk for 5 or 6 meters before leaping into the air and pouncing toward Renbochin, who was free-falling in mid-air. Slap! The leopard's front claws hit Renbochin's spear, and its bloody mouth, which was full of sharp teeth, bit at Renbochin's throat. If Renbochin couldn't dodge in time, this bite would have bitten off his head. The stench from the leopard's mouth assaulted Renbochin's nose, and he subconsciously wanted to cover his nose. At this moment, a metal chain suddenly emerged from the top of Renbochin's head and struck the leopard's eye. The chain was too sudden, and the leopard's eye exploded. The leopard howled miserably, twisted its body, and fell to the ground. Its body emitted a ferocious aura as it stared at Renbochin with a cruel and resentful gaze. An injured beast was even more dangerous. Renbochin loosened his grip on the spear and lowered his body. Wild beasts were much more difficult to deal with than humans. The beast in front of him was called a luoyang. It wasn't easy to deal with as it was very vigilant and strong. Its only valuable thing was the horn on its head, which could be blown dozens of kilometers away. Renbochin had seen the horn of a 100-year-old luoyang before. The one in front of him was only about 60 years old, but it was already very difficult to deal with. He didn't know what a 100-year-old luoyang would be like. The giant leopard roared and slowly retreated. Renbochin was initially on high alert, but couldn't help but laugh when he saw what it did next. This was probably equivalent to a human saying, "Just you wait." After the luoyang retreated into the darkness, Renbochin held the spear upside down behind him, stood there for a few minutes, and then turned to leave. However, before he could walk more than 10 meters away, he heard the sound of grass rubbing against wood. A huge leopard pounced out of the darkness with its mouth wide open, and a gust of fishy wind blew at him. What a cunning thing! What a vengeful thing! Renbochin cursed softly and turned to the side of luoyang. His spear suddenly appeared in his hand, and he thrust it out first. After missing, he used a flick and drew a bloody wound on the side of luoyang's body. At the same time, the luoyang's tail suddenly whizzed toward Renbochin like a whip. Renbochin threw out a chain, which collided with the luoyang's tail and entangled it tightly. This time, the luoyang was really unlucky. His tail seemed to have been tied with a rope, and the rope was being held by someone else. Just as the luoyang landed and turned around, Renbochin leaped into the air and used the momentum of its turn to leap behind it. He stabbed his spear down from midair, and the luoyang dodged, but another wound appeared on its body. Following which, it pounced forward, trying to distance itself from Renbochin. It was a pity that Renbochin was still dragging the metal chain. How could it speed up while dragging such a burden? On the contrary, its tail hurt from being dragged, but it was still a beast after all, and it ran even faster. Renbochin exerted a little strength in his legs and was dragged along like a kite. Seeing that the luoyang was about to pounce into the bushes, the spear in his hand shot out like lightning and directly stabbed into its back. Buzz! A miserable howl pierced through the sky. Renbochin disdainfully pulled out the golden spear and cut off the luoyang's horn. Then, he pinched his nose and lifted the golden spear far away to find a water source to wash it. Along the way, Renbochin often went into the forest to hunt. The assassination skills that he had previously trained at the base had improved significantly. His marksmanship had improved as well, and his control over his body had also improved. If he continued like this, with the Empress's support, Renbochin might really be able to embark on the path of an expert. After a few days, his assassination talent had reached level 2. It was level 1 on Earth, and it had increased by another level after returning. Renbochin felt that if he continued like this, he might be able to obtain a title like the King of Eternal Darkness. After all, he didn't like to fight and kill like this. Now that he had the ability to protect himself, it was more or less enough. After washing the spear, he let the golden spear return to his sea of knowledge. Renbochin carried the luoyang horn and ran out of the forest. The other winged cavalry warriors had already brought their prey back. The light from the fire in the campsite illuminated far away, and Renbochin could already smell the aroma of roasted meat before he even got close. After the Imperial Kitchen's chef obtained the seasonings, he continuously experimented and found that the roasted meat tasted much better than Renbochin's. However, when Renbochin had nothing to do, he would still roast it himself and share it with the Empress. It had nothing to do with whether it tasted good or not. Just like in the age of the internet, a personally written letter always gave people a special feeling. Renbochin threw the luoyang horn into the carriage, turned around, and walked to the Empress's side. Feeling bored, the Empress asked casually when she saw his expression. "Yeah, it's been fresh for a few days, and the heat has passed." I won't do this again if I have nothing to do. Ren Baqian laughed. The Empress pushed a plate of roasted meat to Ren Baqian, combed her hair, and said, "It's good to do it again. In any case, there are people looking after you, and nothing will happen. You can also train. Only through constant battles will you improve quickly. With your Majesty around, why would I improve so quickly?" Ren Baqian licked his face. It was obvious that he was shameless. In any case, he had never asked for it. His fiancée was so powerful, why would he train so hard? You! The Empress stretched out her finger and pointed at him helplessly. These 2 days, when she saw Ren Baqian hunting in the forest when he was resting, she thought that he had changed. The Empress was rather gratified by this. In the end, he returned to his original self in just a few days. "When you go back in a while, I will follow you to take a look." The Empress did not mention the matter just now and changed the topic. Previously, she heard from Ren Baqian that he was going to meet an old man, who was also one of the rulers of that country. 2 days ago, Your Majesty said that you weren't interested, Ren Baqian said with a smile. She changed her mind. You just got into trouble, and now, someone wants to meet you. I'm afraid there's something going on. Furthermore, you were born and raised there, and you still have feelings in your heart. As such, you can't be open-minded when doing things. If you are pressured by people using righteousness and the like, you will easily suffer losses if you don't think things through. I will follow them there and listen to what they have to say. If what they say isn't to my liking, I will fall out with them. If someone provokes me, I will kill them. As for the matter regarding the 1,000 warriors, you may have misgivings, but I don't. When the time comes, I will tell them openly that I have already made my decision, and it's useless for them to object. Ren Baqian was silent for a while. The Empress's words were very overbearing, but to put it bluntly, she was afraid that he would encounter danger there again. Following which, he laughed again and asked, Your Majesty, are you going to play the role of the bad guy? Black face and red face are the terms on earth. If there's nothing going on, I will play the bad guy. If there's something going on, I will let them experience it, the Empress said faintly. Experience what kind of character the fourth most powerful expert in the world, Qi Zixiao, was. Don't feel that this is inappropriate. It's better to leave a deep impression on them now and let them have misgivings. It's better than one day falling out with them, the Empress said again. Ren Baqian laughed and said, Are we considered husband and wife now? One plays the bad guy, and the other plays the good guy. This is rather safe. Your Majesty is right. It's better to clarify the situation now than to fall out with them in the future. It's good that you can understand. I was afraid that you would feel uncomfortable, so I didn't intervene. This time, you have encountered such danger, and I'm afraid that you will encounter it again in the future. I can't just let it go. Seeing that Ren Baqian was laughing, the Empress laughed as well. Her eyes wandered, and her voice became gentler. 1,000 Kismet Heaven experts. Ren Baqian sighed. 1,000 Kismet Heaven experts could even defeat a 100,000-strong army in one blow. If necessary, I can have more, the Empress said faintly. The only problem is the food. Fortunately, even though the food on your side doesn't convert much blood and qi, there's a lot of it. There's plenty of food for them to eat to their heart's content. If it weren't for their gluttony, the winged cavalry wouldn't only have 1,500 people. Reading a book from a friend, the host's head hurts. Chapter 730. Your Majesty. Ren Baqian reached out and held the Empress's hand. Then, he held Lin Xiaola's collar, who was snoring and drooling. An idea popped into Ren Baqian's mind. It would be interesting if Lin Xiaola was left naked in Dayo when the clothes arrived. It was just a thought. He knew that Lin Xiaolo would definitely be taken away if she wasn't overweight. Unless she was 50 kilograms heavier than him and he didn't touch her, such a situation would only occur. The air around them began to distort. At this moment, a red line suddenly appeared and crashed into Renbaqian's chest. When the surroundings changed, they were back in the courtyard of the villa, where the carriage was previously placed. The temperature had also changed from extremely hot to cold. The cold air made Renbaqian feel comfortable from head to toe. Renbaqian used to hate the winter in the northeast. It was very cold, but Dayo was extremely hot all year round. This made him miss this cold feeling. Lin Xiaolo was still snoring in Renbaqian's arms. She even wiped her drool. The Empress, on the other hand, had a faint smile on her face as she stretched out her arm and carried a small red object. It was about the size of a teddy bear and slightly smaller than an ordinary fox. It had a pair of wings, a red back, and a white abdomen. Its small head was baring its teeth at the Empress, making a fierce look. This fellow, I've finally seen someone walk right into the trap. Renbaqian was surprised to see the little thing in the Empress's hands. This thing seems to be very interested in you. The Empress sized up the little thing with great interest. The bichi was a very rare beast in legends. It could be said to be a symbol of misfortune. Its speed determined that most people could only see its back occasionally. Unless it was willing, it would be difficult for others to touch it. Even the Empress couldn't catch up with its speed. However, no one expected it to walk right into the trap at this time. Whether I'm in Dayo or on Earth, I don't know where this thing is hiding. It will only appear when I travel. I reckon that something attracted it at that moment, Renbaqian said after pondering for a while. That should be the case. The Empress nodded. After so many times, did your Majesty find anything? Renbaqian asked curiously. The Empress shook her head and replied, no. The only thing I could sense was that there was a change in the air before we traveled, as if something had been opened. What is it? A passage between two worlds. Renbaqian nodded. He didn't know if this passage was what attracted the bichi. Perhaps there was something else, but he hadn't discovered it yet. Unfortunately, it couldn't speak. Renbaqian went forward and scratched its exposed belly. The bichi immediately struggled with all its might and kicked its claws randomly, causing several scratches on Renbaqian's hand. Behave yourself. Is this male or female? Renbaqian took the risk of getting more than a dozen bloody scratches on his hands, pulled open its legs, and looked around curiously. The bichi immediately exploded and kept barking at him. Woof! Woof woof! Woof woof woof! If it wasn't for the fact that it was being held tightly by the Empress, it would have fought to the death with Renbaqian. Should I prepare a cage for it? Renbaqian thought about putting this thing in a cage and sending it to the capital of Great Xia. He reckoned that there wouldn't be many people in Great Xia after a few years. The Empress liked the big round eyes of the bichi, and her face was full of love. Forget it, it's just a small thing. It doesn't matter if it's a blessing or a misfortune, it looks quite pitiful, and it's not good to bully it. The Empress stretched out her other hand and touched its head before letting go. The bichi immediately turned into a red shadow, pounced on Renbaqian's face, and scratched his face. Ouch! Just as Renbaqian cried out, the little thing disappeared. You have offended it badly. The Empress pursed her lips and laughed. Renbaqian looked aggrieved and said, Your Majesty, don't laugh, I'm disfigured. I just need to apply some ointment, the Empress said casually. This little thing is actually quite smart. The bloody scratches on your face look scary, but it's actually not a big deal. This little thing has barbs on its claws, and if it wants to, it can tear off a piece of flesh. Renbaqian sighed. This was an undeserved calamity. Wasn't it just to see if it was male or female? No matter how smart this thing was, it was still a beast. Did it have any moral values? Forget it, he didn't want to think about it anymore. Renbochin turned his head and saw a row of winged cavalry warriors standing there obediently. Greetings, boss. Greetings, lady boss. 10 lashes for each of you to remember. Remember to bring a whip next time, the Empress said faintly. Yes. Everyone immediately responded without any hesitation. Wake up, we're at our stop. Renbochin threw Lin Chaola on the ground and gently kicked her butt. Oh. Lin Chaola rubbed her eyes and got up from the ground. What's this place called again? Lin Chaola looked at the courtyard and the villa in front of her and realized that she was no longer in Dayo. Let's go in and change. Renbochin slapped the back of her head and threw her a piece of white rabbit creamy candy. This fully demonstrated what it meant to be slapped and given a piece of candy. The winged cavalry warriors heaved a sigh of relief after they entered the villa to change. This punishment seemed heavy, but it was actually very light. It was already good enough that the Empress didn't skin them alive. The Empress minded her own business and returned to her room. Renbochin's job was to change Lin Chaola's clothes. It sounded like a benefit, but Renbochin wasn't interested in her flat figure. He would have seen it many times if he wanted to. She usually wore a tube top and shorts when she slept. Her sleeping posture wasn't good, and there wasn't much to show. Renbochin felt that he might as well look at himself instead of her. At least his chest muscles were bigger. He took out a t-shirt and threw it to her. Wear it the same as last time. Previously, when the Empress was besieged in Tianjing Basin, Renbochin brought Lin Chaola, Qing Yuan, and Hong Wan here once, so they knew how to wear their clothes. Oh. Lin Chaola grunted and took off her clothes. She was still wearing a tube top and a pair of shorts inside. She then put the t-shirt over her body like a robe. The hem of the t-shirt reached her knees, and half of her shoulders were exposed. Lin Chaola was very skinny, and her appearance was different from the wildness of the aboriginals. Instead, she was delicate and pretty like a little white flower. Now that she was wearing a robe, she looked like a little girl next door with a pure and soft aura. After returning her clothes, her eyelids started to struggle. She fell onto the bed and moaned comfortably on the soft mattress. Renbochin turned his head to take a look after changing his clothes. The Empress wanted her to be his bodyguard when he returned to Earth in the future. No matter who saw her youthful and soft appearance, they wouldn't think that she was dangerous. In fact, she didn't hold back when she killed people and didn't feel guilty at all. It was as if she was drinking water or more vividly like a wild beast hunting. Renbochin gave Yang Sin a call to confirm the itinerary. When he went downstairs, he saw the Empress in a red dress sitting on the sofa eating ice cream. It's 9:00 in the morning now. We will set off in an hour and arrive at the destination in the evening, Renbochin said as he sat beside the Empress. Oh, this is the last one left. The Empress pointed to the wrapper of the Chaola ice cream on the table. This was much more important than what Renbochin said. An hour later, 3 cars stopped in front of Renbochin's villa. Your Majesty, let's go. Renbochin stood up and pulled the Empress to the second floor to bring Lin Chaola down. He didn't know what was waiting for him on this trip to the north. Renbochin was more or less looking forward to it. Recommend my friends, Master Chef. Chapter 731. It's snowing. Renbochin walked out of the station and stretched out his palms to welcome the falling snowflakes. Towards snow, his feelings were still quite deep. It snows 5 months a year in the Northeast. Many of his childhood memories were related to snow. That included the 2 brothers making a snowman. In the end, he made a pile of snow and stuffed Renwanyan into it. That was how a freshly baked snowman was made. However, in recent years, they had rarely seen snow. They had only seen it once during the Chinese New Year 2 years ago. They hadn't even seen it last year. What is this? Lin Chaola finally woke up after sleeping all the way. She looked at the falling snowflakes curiously. However, the others looked at her curiously. She was still wearing the t-shirt that Rinpoche had casually thrown at her. Everything below his knees was exposed, and he only had a half-sleeved shirt on his upper body. No matter how one looked at him, he did not look like a normal person in this season. What is this? It's like the ice in the palace. Lin Chaola patted the snowflakes on her face with a satisfied expression. Miss Lin is really naive and romantic. Yang Sen said with a laugh by the side. Rinpoche looked at her, nodded, and said, "You can say that." Both he and the Empress were wearing overcoats that Yang Sen had brought over. Lin Chaola also had one, but she didn't really like it. Rinpoche threw a white rabbit creamy candy over, waved his hand, and said, "Let's go." There were 3 cars with special license plates waiting outside. There were 2 cars at the front and back, and there were capable men standing in front of each car. Rinpoche, the Empress, and the Empress boarded the car in the middle. On the way, the sky darkened. Their destination was a courtyard in the imperial capital. There was a big iron gate outside, and inside was a small 2-story building. The first floor was lit up. A young man brought the 3 of them to the door and pressed the doorbell. The one who opened the door was an old man with jet black hair. He smiled and said, "Welcome. My identity is inconvenient, so I can't personally pick you up. Did you neglect me along the way?" "Boss, you are too serious," Rinpoche immediately replied. "Boss? Ha!" The old man immediately laughed and extended his hand to Rinpoche. "It's been a few years, and I finally get to see you in person." It wouldn't be appropriate to say that he was being courteous, but he was indeed very gentle and treated Rinpoche as an equal. His opponent's hand was steady and strong. This surprised Rinpoche. After all, given his age, it was indeed surprising that his palms were so strong. "Boss, have you practiced the 9th set of Qi?" Rinpoche immediately understood. That's right, the name of this basic technique that was suitable for ordinary people to cultivate was the 9th body-nourishing Qigong. This is the 11th set. First meet, then chat. "Miss Qi, may I know what the etiquette is in your country?" "Etiquette doesn't matter." "I don't care about that," the Empress said casually. Lady Qi also holds a high position in the blessed and heavenly enclave. She is truly a woman who is not inferior to men. The old man laughed and said, "You're wrong. Only ordinary people say that women are not inferior to men. People like Miss Qi naturally can't say that." Even though the Empress's identity wasn't made clear, from what Rinpoche had said when he was holding the weapon and the information gathered from other sources, it was inferred that the Empress held a high position in the paradise. It was just that they weren't sure of her exact identity. "And this is?" The old man looked at Lin Chaola, who was trying hard to separate her upper and lower eyelids. This girl wasn't in her information. Her surname is Lin. Just pretend that she doesn't exist. Please come in. The room was decorated in a Chinese style with walnut and vermilion furniture. Even though Rinpoche couldn't tell if it was made of solid wood, such a high-ranking big shot couldn't possibly use laminated wood, right? "This is my wife. These are Mr. Ren, Miss Qi, and Miss Lin, whom I have mentioned to you before." The old man introduced a woman in the room to them. "I have seen Madam on television many times. I didn't expect to have such an opportunity this time." Rinpoche laughed. After they sat down, the old woman poured tea for them, and the old man said, "I have known about you for a few years. Back then, you were running around everywhere, and I only came back after contacting you. I have wanted to meet you for a long time, but I never had the chance. Either I wasn't free, or I couldn't find you. Now, my wish has been fulfilled. There will be plenty of opportunities. With your current physique and cultivation of life nourishment, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future. Ren Baqian laughed. While they were chatting, Lin Chaola finally couldn't open her eyes. She slumped to the side and fell asleep. Ren Baqian noticed it, but pretended not to see it. In any case, the old man had a big belly and wouldn't stoop to her level. He couldn't figure out Lin Chaola's identity and pretended not to see it. At this age, who can say for sure what will happen in the future? Moreover, I have come down now and don't have any duties. I won't have to worry so much in the future. The old man laughed. You have come down. Ren Baqian was stunned. The old man was also stunned by his reaction. He then shook his head and laughed. Although it wasn't a big deal for him to come down, the other party's reaction was that he didn't know anything. I came down last year. I've finally settled some of the matters that I need to attend to, so I can finally relax now, the old man explained. Only then did Ren Baqian react. Last year, 2023, the other party should have come down. In other words, the person in charge had changed. Just as the Empress had said, a new ruler would have a new court. The leaders on Earth would change every 8 to 10 years. After a few decades, there would be a few changes, and it was hard to say how they would view him at that time. It had only been a few years, and the new generation actually didn't contact him. It wasn't that he was awesome. After all, his identity was special, and he had the so-called paradise behind him. He was a little surprised that the new generation didn't contact him. However, you don't have to worry. After all, with your identities, no matter who is in charge, it won't affect you. The current generation actually wanted to contact you for a long time, but I haven't finished handing over some matters. This time, besides fulfilling a wish, I invited you here to introduce you, the old man continued, seeming to read Ren Baqian's mind. Don't tell me that you don't want to chat with an old man like me now that I'm no longer in charge. The old man chuckled. How is that possible? Ren Baqian laughed. Many people can't even dream of chatting with the big boss. That's good. Don't call me big boss. Call me Mr., the old man said. Mr. Ren Baqian nodded. I've been curious about the paradise for a long time. I wonder if you can tell me a little about it. Previously, when I heard the two of you talking, I always felt that the paradise and this world are of the same origin. Just like how Miss Qi addressed herself as Zhen, which has been used since ancient times in our country. During the Qin dynasty, the first emperor, under Li Si's suggestion, used this word as a unique title for the emperor. I wonder if the word Zhen in the paradise is a form of address or a unique title? My wife is a professor of literature. After so many years, I'm also very interested in these things. Ren Baqian's eyes flickered. Was the old man really just curious? Or could he judge something from this word? He didn't dare to miss a word when talking to someone like the old man. Furthermore, they were talking about the paradise. It's a form of address, not a unique title, Ren Baqian said after thinking for a while. Chapter 732. Apart from Shiqing, Ren Baqian, the Empress, and all the other officials in the imperial court wouldn't be able to handle such a person. Whether it was in terms of his keen political sense, emotional intelligence, or cultural foundation. Even though Ren Baqian was very careful, the other party still managed to get a lot of useful information from his casual conversation. Even if the other party didn't deliberately use this method to get information, he could still see some clues from Ren Baqian's answers. This was probably a kind of instinct. After chatting for 3 hours and having a very ordinary dinner, Renbochin arranged to meet the other party the next day before leaving with Lin Chaola and the Empress. "I'm hungry. Let's eat," the Empress said as soon as they left the house. She couldn't even bring herself to eat the food for dinner. It was gone in one mouthful. After waking Lin Chaola up, the three of them found a place to eat the entire hotpot restaurant. Yang Sen's eyes almost popped out. The place arranged for them was a good hotel. Renbochin didn't know why they only booked 2 suites. Renbochin pondered for a while. Would he share a suite with Lin Chaola or the Empress? "What are you thinking about?" The Empress glanced at him while they were in the elevator. "I'm thinking about whether to let Lin Chaola share a suite with you," Renbochin said bluntly. "No." The Empress rejected him without hesitation. "Then she can only share a suite with me." Renbochin looked at Lin Chaola with disdain. If it was Xianjia. Xianjia's figure was much better than Lin Chaola's. Furthermore, she was a bespectacled lady. No matter how he looked at it, she was better than Lin Chaola, who only ate and slept. The Empress looked at him and said, "You and I share a suite." "That's good." Renbochin immediately laughed. He had always supported this kind of suggestion. However, since it was a suite, it was divided into inner and outer rooms. Renbochin naturally sat on the sofa. Voluntarily. "Really?" As they sat on the sofa, Renbochin suddenly asked, "What does your Majesty wear when you sleep?" The Empress blushed and rolled her eyes at him. "Do you want to see?" With the wedding date set, the Empress seemed to be getting used to certain topics and not being so sensitive. "I want to see." Renbochin nodded his head and was kicked to the wall by the Empress. "It's a lie that I don't want to see it." "If I don't want to see it, will Her Majesty blame me?" Renbochin asked while covering his nose. The Empress seriously thought about this question and said, "I will beat you to death." "Why did you kick me then?" Renbochin felt wronged. "Kick." The Empress's answer was simple and to the point. Renbochin, in any case, he would be beaten if he didn't want to see it, but he would be beaten if he wanted to see it, right? "When can you be more reasonable, Your Majesty?" Renbochin lamented. "Do you think I'm being unreasonable now?" The Empress looked at him and sneered. From her words, Renbochin could tell that she used to call Xiao Tian Tian, but now she was calling her Madame Niu. Renbochin felt that he wouldn't end up well if he continued to discuss the issue of reason with the Empress. It was a mistake to discuss this issue, and it had to be corrected. "I was wrong." The words from His Majesty's mouth were the truth. "If anyone dares to say no, just kill and bury them." Renbochin made a solemn vow. "What are your thoughts after seeing that person today, Your Majesty?" Renbochin changed the topic. "Too weak," the Empress said without hesitation. As for other things, her focus was completely different from Renbochin's. Naturally, the conclusions that they reached were very different. After watching TV until midnight, the Empress swayed her body and entered the room. Renbochin leaned on the sofa and watched the door close. Looking at the time, there were still more than 8 months before the wedding. This period of time was really long. The next day, after breakfast, a car took the three of them to the most mysterious place in the entire imperial capital. Renbochin was very curious and even a little nervous along the way. However, when he arrived, he realized that it was somewhat different from what he had imagined. The sentries everywhere were similar to what he had imagined. In addition, the scenery was pretty good. As for the rest, many famous places were just ordinary-looking bungalows. If it was in other places, it would at most have some historical value and could be visited. Other than that, there weren't many things that people would pay attention to. What was really worth paying attention to was the person who lived here. In a parlor, Renbochin finally met the successor of that old man. Yesterday, he went back and checked on his phone, so he more or less knew a little about him. He was about 10 years younger than the old man, but his hair had already turned white. When the two of them stood together, it was hard to tell who was older and who was younger. This place has received presidents and dignitaries from various countries, but this is the first time that the two of you have such statuses. Even I will be recorded in the annals of history. The other party laughed. Renbochin really didn't consider whether he would be recorded in the annals of Earth's history. However, even if he was recorded, he was afraid that it would be an unknown part of history. Just like those people and things that were buried in history. It was a little different from the serious conversation that he had expected. After the four of them met, they simply sat in the room and chatted as if they were just trying to get to know each other. Not to mention that the other party was very busy, he had a lot of things to do every day. Renbochin didn't believe that the other party would spend half a day sitting here just to get to know each other. After a simple lunch, they finally got down to business. This time, we were negligent in our work and caused some trouble for Mr. Ren. Although it's harmless, it affected our mood. With this experience, we will be strict in this area in the future. I don't need you. I will send 1,000 people from the paradise to be stationed here, the Empress said directly. The Empress's words were very direct. She didn't want to beat around the bush with the other party because that wasn't her forte. Without any probing or giving the other party any time to react, she said what she wanted to say. 1,000 people wouldn't be a big deal if they were ordinary people. However, if there were 1,000 experts, then it would not be a small matter. The two of them carefully looked at the Empress and then at Renbochin, but they didn't directly object. Instead, they thought for a while and said, 1,000 people isn't a small number. I'm afraid it will be a little troublesome to make arrangements. After all, they aren't ordinary people, and it will be easy to cause a disturbance with them. I'm not asking, the Empress said directly. The other party smiled. If it wasn't an inquiry, then it was a notification. Although the other party was surprised by this matter, he wasn't surprised by the Empress's attitude. After all, with her strength, it would be strange if she spoke to them like a politician. However, 1,000 people would probably cause a lot of trouble in the country. 2 hours later, Renbochin and the Empress finally left the reception hall. The other party agreed to the Empress's request for 1,000 experts. In fact, it was difficult for the other party to object. However, for the rest of the time, the few of them discussed another matter. They were building a new city in the country. Wuji City. Or rather, Wuji City. As the name suggested, the function and significance of this city could be seen from its name. As the peak of martial arts, it was also the highest point. For the time being, it wasn't only the temporary settlement for 1,000 people, but also the martial arts training base in the country. This was a city that wasn't open to the public. After the spread of martial arts, this place became the gathering place for experts from all over the world. From a certain point of view, Renbochin and the Empress's 1,000 people had become the signboard of this place. With these 1,000 people here, this place would become the target of all the experts in the country and even the world. In a future where the entire world was changing, the value of this city could be said to be immeasurable. At the same time, the other party could also use this city to gather the most uncontrollable group of people. Renbochin suspected that the other party had been thinking about this problem for a long time. In any case, he could be said to be working with the country to plan for the future. The gains were huge. Of course, Renbochin also made a series of other agreements with the other party. Chapter 733. After the trip to the north, Renbochin and the Empress returned to their villa in Shanghai and hurried back to Dayo. When he returned to Earth again, it was exactly 21 days later. As soon as he returned, he received news that the location of Wuji City had been chosen. There were a few locations to choose from. One was the prairie in the north, and the other was the plateau in the west. It was easier to prohibit ordinary people from entering. However, they were all rejected by Rinpoche. In such a sparsely populated place, an inexplicable nuclear test could destroy the entire Wuji city. Although the possibility wasn't high, it couldn't be avoided. Under his strong request, the location was set in Jiangqing, which was already very densely populated. With a rough location, it was much easier to choose a location. However, Rinpoche was still a little surprised that the address could be chosen in 21 days. After all, this was a new city. Furthermore, it was a special city that rejected ordinary people. There were too many aspects to consider, such as traffic, the environment, the surrounding cities, and the impact on ordinary people. This confirmed Rinpoche's intuition that the other party probably had this idea for a long time and didn't come up with it on the spur of the moment. Even the blueprint of Wuji city had been sent to Rinpoche. This was because Rinpoche had a piece of land in Wuji city, which was close to the city center. It was about 1 square kilometer of land. According to the plan, Wuji city occupied more than 300 square kilometers and could accommodate millions of people. It was designed to be the smallest super city in the future. From this, it could be seen that the value of 1 square kilometer of land could reach a terrifying figure in the future. 1 square kilometer didn't sound like much, but Rinpoche had a lease period of 300 years. The length and width of the land were 1,000 meters, which was equivalent to 140 standard soccer fields. Whether he built a mansion, a high-rise building, an apartment, or a shopping mall on this land was entirely up to him. The more than 300 square kilometers of Wuji city also included a lot of infrastructure, such as roads, schools, parks, hospitals, and so on. In addition, there was another special thing about Wuji city: it was a city with walls. The original purpose of the city walls was to defend against wild beasts and foreign enemies, which was very far from a peaceful modern society. However, in order to facilitate management and isolate ordinary people, Wuji city was still designed with walls. The walls were up to 20 meters high and surrounded the entire city, separating the inside and the outside into 2 parts. Rinpoche held the plan and looked at it for 2 days. Finally, he chose a plot of land and sent it back. Rinpoche estimated that with the nation's power, it would take at least 2 to 3 years for most of the facilities to be completed. That was 1 year in Dayo time. It just so happened that after his wedding with the Empress. But before that, he should start working on his own piece of land. According to his idea, part of it would be built into a mansion, part of it would be built into a martial arts center, and the other part would be a mix of commercial buildings and residential areas. He called Ren Wanyan and Ding Jia over. The 2 of them wanted to laugh when they saw Rinpoche. This was because Rinpoche's face was covered in scratches. He didn't know if it was because of that fairy-like woman. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't imagine that a woman like that would scratch people. Only Rinpoche knew that this was because he was scratched by the Bichi on his way here. That bastard, it seemed like he bore a grudge against him, scratching him with his claws the moment he saw him. Wasn't it just to see if it was male or female? Sooner or later, he would find a chance to deal with it. Rinpoche first asked about the 2 of them. Ding Jia was now in his 3rd year of university and had grown a lot taller. He had experienced more things in the past 3 years than he had in the past 10 years. He had matured a lot, and his speech and actions had become more capable. The same went for Ren Wanyan. Rinpoche projected the plan on the wall. Look at this plan. What's this? Boss, you want to do real estate. Which city is this? Ding Jia looked at the plan on the wall carefully and was able to figure out something. In the past few years, he had dabbled in other things besides his subject. After all, he wasn't like other students who didn't know where his future lay. Learning more things was always good for him and could make the boss value him more. This is the plan for a new city, Renbochin said slowly as he sat on the sofa and held a cup of tea. Both of you have practiced the 9th set of life technique, and naturally know the use of this technique. The two of them looked at each other and nodded. The future will change. A new branch of the human race will appear, and a new choice will be made. Not only will we pursue technological progress, but we will also pursue our own evolution and strength. The 9th set of life technique is the first step. The two of them were taken aback. A new choice for the future of the human race. To pursue our own evolution and strength. This was too arrogant. Brother, what level can we reach by practicing this? Ren Wanyan asked doubtfully. After practicing this technique, he gained a little more strength and a little faster. He believed in this life force Qigong. However, he didn't know what level it could reach. According to his thinking, it would at most reach the level of the people in the villa who could use cars as fitness equipment. Although this was already very shocking, it was still too exaggerated to say that it was a branch of the human race's future. What level? Renbochin pondered for a while. They can still catch bullets with their bare hands. A real expert can crush a mountain with one punch. It's just like those xianxia movies you watch. Although they aren't that powerful, they can still change the course of human development. This, crush a mountain with one punch, was, of course, referring to Li Fu. When developed to the extreme, it would probably reach the level of Li Fu. The two of them gasped and murmured, unbelievable. It's indeed hard to believe, but I saw it with my own eyes, so you don't have to doubt it. I'm just telling you about the possible future. Under such circumstances, the announcement of this technique will definitely have an impact on the world's perception, and the structure of the entire world will also change. Boss, are you planning for the martial arts centers? Ding Jia immediately asked. Renbochin nodded and continued, the country is also planning for it, and this Wuji city is one of the most important points. Wuji is the limit of martial arts. You should understand the meaning of the name. This city will be the gathering place for all the martial arts experts in the future. At this point, Renbochin suddenly paused, and the idea of holding a martial arts conference in Wuji City came to mind. If a martial arts conference could be held in Wuji City every year, this city would naturally gather the experts from all over the world, and it would be worthy of its name. In any case, the prize money would still be his in the end. Or he could find the country to sponsor it and earn a sum of money when the time came. After putting this idea aside for the time being, Renbochin continued, this city covers an area of more than 300 square kilometers, and I have 1 square kilometer of land at my disposal. The two of them sucked in a breath of cold air. Although they knew that Renbochin had a very high status and had a considerable relationship with some government departments, they didn't expect him to be so capable. According to him, this city would probably be the center of the country in the future. Renbochin was actually given 1 square kilometer of land for such an important city. Brother, what did you do? Ren Wanyan was speechless. His brother was becoming more and more incomprehensible. You don't have to worry about this. You just need to know that I have 1 square kilometer of land in this city. This is the opportunity for you to show your abilities. Make a plan to maximize the use of this 1 square kilometer of land. My initial idea is to build a building with the 1st to 3rd floors as the headquarters of the martial arts center. The 4th and above floors can be used for other purposes, and the top floor can be used as my residence. Other than that, you can think about how to plan the rest of the area. Both business and accommodation are needed, and there should be at least enough to accommodate thousands of people. A hotel is also a good choice. I will leave this matter to you, but remember to keep it a secret. No matter who it is, you can't tell anyone about this. Renbochin's voice deepened, and the two of them immediately became nervous. Even though Ren Wanyan was his younger brother, he still felt a little nervous when his older brother spoke in such a serious tone. Boss, what about the scale of the investment? Ding Jia asked. 1 square kilometer of land wasn't a small number to build. Tens of billions of yuan might not even be enough. Moreover, Ren Baqian didn't seem to be selling houses like those real estate developers, so funding was a big problem. You don't have to think about this matter. Just make the plan. Ren Baqian said casually. This surprised the two of them again, and they didn't know how much assets Ren Baqian had now. In fact, Ren Baqian still had a few hundred million yuan, mainly from the dividends from the pharmaceutical factory. A few hundred million yuan seemed like a lot, but it was just a drop in the bucket. However, he didn't have to pay for the construction of this land. Wasn't there a bank? Wasn't there a loan? In any case, there was definitely no problem with a low-interest loan. Tens of billions of yuan was a lot for others, but it wasn't a huge figure for the national bank. If there was a need, it wouldn't be a problem to borrow more. As for the repayment date, it would be 300 years later. It could be said that money was the least of his concerns at the moment. After leaving this matter to the two of them, Ren Baqian waited to see the results. Even if their plans weren't in line with his own ideas, it would at least give him some ideas. After that, he returned to Deo and continued on his journey. Chapter 734. Deo was vast and sparsely populated. To what extent? Apart from the 60,000 mountains, the land area of Deo was about 1/4 the size of China. Tianjin Basin occupied 1/6 of the total area, which was 400,000 square kilometers. It was equivalent to the area of 2 ordinary provinces and accommodated 10 million people. The remaining 2 million square kilometers was equivalent to 10 ordinary provinces, but there were less than 4 million aboriginals. There were more than 10 million aboriginals, and 10 million of them lived in the 60,000 mountains. 10 provinces covered an area of only 4 million people. From this, it could be seen how sparsely populated Deo was. It was common for one to not see a village for 2 to 3 days. The further they got from Lan City, the more desolate it became. Other than the barren mountains and forests where various ferocious beasts lived, there were boundless grasslands where large herds of 4-corned cows and jumping goats were raised. Tens of thousands of 4-corned cows and jumping sheep were moving on the grassland. It was a spectacular scene. However, he was most vexed about the road here. There were almost no roads. There was only one bumpy dirt road, which was much worse than the roads in other places. After the rain, it was all muddy, and the wheels often got stuck in the mud. Just like that, he treaded forward for a week and finally neared his final destination before entering the 60,000 mountains. When the towering mountain peaks could be seen in the distance, Ren Baqian and the others finally arrived at the last and largest city in the 60,000 mountains. It was also the port of communication between the 60,000 mountains and the outside world, Ye City. It was also called Barbarian City. This city had been left behind by the previous dynasty of the Hao nation. Barbarians was how they addressed the aboriginals. It also meant that one would be in the wilderness after passing through this city. Even though the Hao nation had perished for 70 years, the name of this city had been passed down. Even the aboriginals called this city Man City most of the time. Lieutenant Zhang Jushan of the Protectorate of the South greets Your Majesty. 1,000 soldiers came to welcome him. They were also dressed in leather armor and had long sabers. However, he felt that there was something different about them. They seemed to be more ferocious than the soldiers in other places. The Empress lifted the curtain to let the soldiers outside see her. Then, she said faintly, "Let's enter the city first." Yes. After traveling for another half a day, they were getting closer and closer to Ye City. However, what attracted him the most was still the mountains in the distance. Mountain peaks stood erect like pillars between the heavens and the earth, piercing straight into the clouds. At a rough glance, there were at least 100 such mountains. It was an extremely spectacular sight. Between these mountain peaks, there were many shorter mountain ranges that meandered up and down, with no end in sight. Looking at it from here, there were only mountains, and nothing else could be seen. That was the 60,000 mountains. When he arrived at the foot of Ye City, he finally shifted his attention to it. The city walls were all built with gray boulders and were filled with coldness. There were sharp protrusions on top of the city walls, like the fangs of a wild beast, covering the entire city walls. These sharp fang-like protrusions had been used to prevent the Aboriginals from attacking the city. Who knew how much blood of the Aboriginals and Jing tribe had flowed on them? After entering Tooth City, there were rows of tall stone houses. The doors were 3 meters tall, and the houses were 4 meters tall. There were no decorations, and it was filled with a simple and unadorned feeling. What he was more concerned about were the Aboriginal commoners who stopped to watch from both sides of the road. Some wore cloth clothes, some wore animal skins, some were bare-chested and had tattoos all over their bodies, and some even wore clothes woven from grass. Some had bird feathers tied to their heads, some had beast tails on their shoulders, some had snakes coiled around their bodies, some had lowing horns on their necks, and many had rows of fangs on their necks. There were also all kinds of tamed beasts. There was a white saber-toothed tiger, a black man who exuded a strong aura, a giant snake with gold and silver patterns, a monkey that was about the size of a human, and a giant bird that was as tall as 2 people. It was a bizarre and dazzling scene. Rinpoche felt as if he had entered another world. There was only one thing in common, and that was that all of them exuded a wild aura. Those people are from different regions. The people of each region have their own unique characteristics, which is a way to show their identity. For example, those with bird feathers tied to their heads are from Haishan. Those with beast tails, such as the tail of a saber-toothed tiger, are from Red Earth Peak. Those with a furry raccoon tail are from Stony Mountain. The Empress said as she looked at the various men and women outside. "Has your Majesty been here before?" Rinpoche turned his head and asked. "I came here once when I was young," the Empress replied faintly. "Your Majesty's memory is really good." Rinpoche was speechless. It had been more than 10 years since she was young, yet she still remembered it so clearly. She was indeed a cheat-like player. "They are my people, so I naturally have to remember them," the Empress said as she stood up, pulled open the curtains of the imperial carriage, stepped out, and stood there looking down at the crowd. "It's the little emperor. The little emperor is back. Her Majesty is back." There was a commotion outside, and many people were shouting that the little emperor was back. Their voices were filled with joy. It seemed that seeing the Empress made them very happy. However, the Empress had been on the throne for 9 years, but in the eyes of these Aboriginals who were far away from Lon City, she was still a little emperor. "Your Majesty, do you still remember Yangchuan village on Red Earth Peak? You even rested in our village back then." "I even ate at Yangchuan village on Red Earth Peak. It was a golden feathered eagle that my father hunted," someone immediately shouted. These people didn't know any etiquette, but there was a kind of simplicity in the mountains. Although their voices were messy, it made the Empress feel peaceful from the bottom of her heart. "Don't shout. Why are you shouting in front of Her Majesty?" The general who had welcomed the Empress immediately reprimanded the commoners by the roadside. "It's nothing." The Empress waved her hand, looked around, and said calmly, "I came back this time to enter the mountains and see if you are doing well. It's fine, but salt is too expensive now. Also, no one is buying animal hides." Someone immediately shouted. "This is temporary. There is a war in the north now. When we win, there will be a large number of salt fields, and the price of salt will drop. You can keep the animal hides for now. Someone will buy them in a few days," the Empress said calmly to the crowd. "That's great. If there is a shortage of manpower during the war, let us know." My son was one step too late last time and didn't become a soldier. I will. The Empress laughed. Little Emperor, are you going to get married? Someone suddenly shouted. The Empress nodded her head and smiled. Yes, someone will send news about my marriage soon. Chapter 735. Boo! As soon as Renbochin came out and stood there, he was met with loud cheers. It made him feel like he wasn't in Yi City, but Diyun society. Renbochin's body was considered extremely strong for an ordinary person, but in the eyes of the Aboriginals, he was still thin and weak. In particular, his appearance was too feminine according to the aesthetic standards of the Aboriginals. He lacked that fierce aura and was simply a gigolo. The Aboriginals didn't have such a term, but it felt similar. Renbochin felt that he was quite innocent. With his current appearance, he would be considered a strong man on earth, but in the eyes of the Aboriginals, he was still a gigolo. It could only be said that this was a racial restriction. The Empress and Renbochin showed up in the city and then moved into the general's residence. Although there was no general in this city, there was a general's residence that had at least a few hundred years of history. Fortunately, the style of the residence was the same as that of the city. It was built with huge stones and hadn't changed much even after hundreds of years of wind and frost. It was just that it had been poorly taken care of. Even though it had been tidied up before the Empress arrived, it still looked a little old. The group stayed in Yi City for 3 days. Renbochin first made a trip back to Earth and brought back the crocodile meat to give away. The crocodile limbs that were sent to the Messier 87 department were finally found to be effective after various tests. One of them was that the crocodile meat contained a lot of energy and could strengthen the muscles and bones, which was extremely useful for practitioners. This was needless to say since it was an Earth-will-level beast after all. It also had the effect of prolonging one's life. Although it wasn't as effective as elixirs, such as the jade embryo, which could extend one's life by 20 years and preserve one's appearance, it was still extremely effective and was already a rare treasure for Earthlings. Secondly, the crocodile liver could produce new blood, which was also extremely important for older practitioners. The heart of the crocodile could nourish the heart and calm the nerves, and it could even cure some heart diseases. The tail of the crocodile had the best effect of prolonging one's life, strengthening one's body, and reducing cell aging. According to speculation, if an ordinary person ate the entire crocodile, their life would be extended by at least 10 years. This showed how precious this giant earth-will crocodile was. The only pity was that this crocodile didn't have much effect on earth-will experts, who had a much longer lifespan than ordinary people. It just so happened that Renbochin had obtained a plot of land in Wuji City. As such, he did them a favor at little cost and brought back some of the items from the crocodile to give to the big shots in the capital. In addition, the crocodile kidney had a strong effect of nourishing the kidneys, and the crocodile penis had a strong effect of boosting one's sexual function. Renbochin was going to keep it for himself to roast the kidneys and make wine. After returning from Earth, Renbochin strolled around Yi City. In fact, Tooth City wasn't small. After all, it was the largest city outside the 60,000 mountains and could accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. However, with the departure of the merchants, the Tooth City became deserted. There were only a few tens of thousands of people in the city. Therefore, it looked a little deserted. However, it was still an eye-opener for Renbochin after spending 3 days in the city. All kinds of rare herbs, rare beasts, hides, and rare ores could be seen in some of the stalls in the city from time to time. Unfortunately, with the departure of those merchants, only a small number of Aboriginal caravans were collecting the herbs. For example, the Empress's caravan, the people from the clinic, and a shop called San Fantang that was arranged by Renbochin. Needless to say, the Empress's caravan collected the herbs mainly for the palace and for Renbochin's training. San Fantang provided various herbs for the rearguard commandery. The name came from the fact that the purchase price was 30% of the market price. In this world where communication was underdeveloped and transportation was difficult, merchants often purchased goods at 10% of the market price or even lower. Even on Earth, most of the time, the purchase price was only 10% or 20% of the market price. Renbachien was already benefiting the people by using 30% of the market price. As a result, even though San Fentang had only been established for 2 months, it had a great reputation and was highly praised. In addition to those rare items, Renbachien also saw many strange things in the city. For example, there was a kind of fruit man flower. The flower was a lifelike image of a naked man. It was said that eating this thing was good for boosting one's sexual function. Renbachien was skeptical when he heard this. He then bought a sack and asked someone to load it into the carriage. What's this? After walking for a short distance, Renbachien saw a pot of flowers placed by someone. The 2 blue flowers on the pot looked like 2 mandarin ducks on earth with their necks crossed. Cross-eared flowers. We use them to give our lovers. The man who set up the stall looked up at Renbachien and seemed to recognize him. Are you Her Majesty's husband? You look skinny and weak. You look like him. Renbachien smiled. How much are these flowers? They are for you. It's just a pot of flowers. The man said generously. Renbachien cupped his hands and said, Thank you very much. The man waved his hand and said, Just make Her Majesty happy. When Renbachien returned with the flowers, he saw a few students strolling in the city. When they saw Renbachien carrying the flowers, they immediately came up and asked curiously, Teacher, what is this? I only envy mandarin ducks, not immortals. This is a mandarin duck flower. Renbachien immediately changed the name of the flower. After changing the name, it immediately felt a lot more elegant. What are mandarin ducks and what are immortals? The students asked again. Renbachien wasn't in the mood to explain to them. He waved them away and hurried back to the general's residence. The Empress was using the radio to deal with state affairs. Renbachien waited for a while before she finished. When she saw the flowers in Renbachien's hands, she immediately smiled and asked, Did you see something good again? Dang, dang, dang. Do you recognize it? Renbachien turned around and put the flowers on the table as if he was presenting a treasure. Cross-eared flowers. The Empress smiled again. You actually know. Renbachien was slightly surprised. When I first came here, I also found this flower strange and asked about it. However, I didn't understand some of the things they said at the time, but now I understand a little. The Empress pursed her lips with a charming look in her eyes. Renbachien stepped forward, covered her face with both hands, looked at her carefully, and gently bumped her forehead before laughing. Back then, the Empress didn't understand what love was. Now, she understood. Get ready to set off tomorrow, the Empress said again. I want to see the scenery and customs of the mountains. Your Majesty likes this place very much. Renbachien laughed. From the Empress's behavior after arriving at Yi City, he felt that her feelings for this place were exceptionally different. At the very least, the Empress's actions and words when they entered the city had never been seen in Lan City or the other cities along the way. When I was young, I felt that this was the most interesting place in the whole world. There were so many strange things and new discoveries every day. At that time, I thought that it would be great if I could always live here, the Empress recalled. However, the living conditions of the people in the mountains aren't very good. In the eyes of outsiders, the Aboriginals seem very powerful because they have to fight with the beasts for survival and have gradually honed their skills over thousands of years. Even so, their lives in the mountains are still very difficult. At that time, the first emperor rebelled to take revenge, but he also had the intention of fighting for a piece of space for them. Unfortunately, most people were unwilling to abandon the place where they had lived for generations. 70 years had passed, and most people were still living in these mountains. When I came here, I saw how difficult it was for them to survive. Although I was very young at that time, I still remembered a lot of things. When I sat in this position, I wanted to make their lives better, but I couldn't do much after so many years. I have always felt a little guilty. The Empress recalled as she spoke slowly. This was something that the Empress rarely shared with anyone. There were many things that she kept in her heart and had been working hard to do them. However, due to the limitations of the era, there were many things that she couldn't do even if she wanted to. Chapter 736. The next day, they left the Empress's carriage and all the carriages in Yi City and set off again. The 4 corned cows were also left behind in Yi City. Other than the Empress, who was riding the Kirin Chi Shui, everyone else was riding jumping goats. Many of the goats had large leather bags hanging on their sides. In fact, these were the stomachs of strange beasts. They were extremely tough, could be enlarged, and could only fit a few people. When shrunk, they were only the size of a fist. Renbaqian had seen them in Lan City before, but there were very few of them. These stomachs had always been very popular with caravans, but now that the merchants had all returned to their respective countries, they had accumulated more than 300 stomachs in Lan City over the past year. Now, Renbaqian had bought all of them and equipped them for the winged cavalry to carry their supplies. It took them half a day to get from Yi City to the entrance of the 60,000 mountains. The more than 100 mountain peaks that looked like pillars supporting the sky finally revealed their complete appearance. The mountain peaks stood there, and there was almost no angle from top to bottom. It was as if they had been inserted there by someone. Trees and vegetation grew from the cracks in the rocks from bottom to top. Birds flew around the peaks, and the cries of apes could be heard from time to time. The overlapping mountain ranges that he saw in the distance were all behind the mountain peaks. These peaks formed a fan shape and stood outside the 60,000 mountains like a barrier. Renbaqian had asked in the city before and found out that there were a total of 108 peaks, which were called the forest pillar screens. This number was very interesting to Renbaqian. 108 represented a lot of things in China. In Chinese culture, 108 represented perfection. Many buildings had the number 108 on them. For example, the lowest level of the Temple of Heaven had 108 stone railings, and the Qinian Palace had 108 stone railings on each level. In Buddhism, 108 represented 108 types of afflictions and were called the 100 defilements. In Taoism, this number also represented the heavenly spirits and earthly fiends. The most famous one was the 108 heroes in Water Margin, which were the heavenly spirits and earthly fiends. There were exactly 108 forest pillar screens here. This made it hard for Renbaqian not to suspect that these forest pillar screens were man-made. Otherwise, why were there 108 of them? Not 107 or 118. But how could these 108 towering mountains in the sky be created by a human? If there was anyone who could create it, it would be the gods in the heavens. If this was a creation of nature, then it could only be said that it was truly the work of the gods, and it would make people gasp in admiration. Moreover, there was another strange thing about the forest pillar screen. This forest pillar screen occupied a large area, tens of thousands of acres. It was covered with dense forests, birds and beasts, and it was close to the outside world. Logically speaking, it was a good place to build a village. Unfortunately, there was not a single stockade in this forest of forest pillars. It was said that there was once a stronghold that moved to this place, but within 2 or 3 years, it had fallen into ruin. There were all kinds of reasons, including natural and man-made disasters. In the end, the people in the stronghold either died or fled. After a long time, no one dared to build a stronghold here. This bizarre number and this bizarre rumor made Renbachien feel a certain amount of reverence and curiosity toward this forest of pillar screens. Within the range of the forest pillar screen, it was all dense jungle. There were trees that were more than 10 meters tall and shrubbery all over the field of vision. It was almost impossible to see beyond 5 meters. There were only extremely narrow paths in the forest. The vegetation here grew extremely fast. After a path was cut, it would be covered with new vegetation in a few days. Only after a long period of time did a path gradually form in places where people passed by. It seemed that the plants also knew how to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. If the branches and leaves in one direction were always broken, then after a long time, that side would not grow again. The group rested outside the forest. From time to time, Renbachien wanted to touch Qi Shui's belly. This wretched action made Qi Shui feel disgusted and immediately lay on the ground when it saw him. Well, I can't touch it like this. It had to be said that Qi Shui had a good temper. If it were a cat, it would have scratched him. After resting, the group plunged into this forest and soon approached a mountain peak. Renbachien specially greeted the Empress and jumped onto a tree branch, wanting to cross over to take a look at the mountain. Then, a snake that had its tail stepped on gave him a bite. At that time, Renbachien cursed as if he had *ket a dog. After throwing the snake down the tree, Renbachien looked behind him for help and asked, "I was bitten by a snake. What should I do?" "Sir Ren, this is a king snake. It's not venomous." The winged cavalry warrior who followed behind him laughed. "The name sounds pretty powerful." Renbachien smacked his lips and was relieved to hear that it wasn't venomous. This snake likes to eat other snakes, no matter how venomous they are. It feeds on snakes, so it's called a king snake. One of the winged cavalry warriors laughed. "Sir Ren, are you going to see the mountain? I'll clear the way for you." Another winged cavalry warrior took out his steel saber and jumped toward the tree trunk in front. A saber light flashed in mid-air, and half of the branch immediately fell. The branch was still twisting in the air. "That's a deadwood snake. It's very venomous. If you get bitten, you have to find fern bud grass nearby to detoxify it. Otherwise, the bite will swell like a water tank," another winged cavalry warrior said. Renbachien nodded. It seemed that there were many kinds of venomous snakes in this forest, and he had better follow the winged cavalry. Following the route of the winged cavalry warriors, they arrived in front of a mountain after half an hour. Renbachien then carefully sized it up. This mountain was mainly made of a kind of gray rock. Its surface was rugged and had very small angles. However, from a distance, it looked like a pillar that pierced the sky. The most interesting thing was that there was a platform at the bottom of this mountain that was made of the same material as the mountain. It was roughly oval in shape, and there were all kinds of miscellaneous trees growing on it. This forest pillar barrier is also called the forest sword barrier because of this. The circle of rocks below is like the handguard of a sword, and every mountain peak has one, the winged cavalry warrior explained to Renbachien. "The aboriginals don't use swords, right? Where did this name come from?" Renbachien asked. The winged cavalry warrior's explanation made him feel that this mountain peak was more and more interesting. "They don't use swords. This name is said to have been passed down from a long time ago. In the past, there were many foreigners who entered the 60,000 mountains to look for herbs. It might have been left behind by people from that time," the winged cavalry warrior guessed. "No one comes in anymore." "Yes, but those who are found have turned into corpses. Back then, it was because he had let them go that the salt mountain in the mountains was poisoned. Now, every village will send experts to kill any outsiders they encounter," the winged cavalry warrior said with a face full of resentment. It was said that before the uprising of the late emperor, the emperor of the Han nation ordered people to poison the salt mountain in the mountains. Many people from the various villages were poisoned to death, and most of the villages died because of this. In the end, the Aboriginals overturned the Hound Nation in a rage. This was considered a classic example of reaping what one had sown. Rinpoche waved his hand, and a golden spear appeared in his hand. He held it with one hand and flicked it toward the mountain peak. He wanted to see if there were any secrets on this mountain peak. "Sir Ren, you can't touch this mountain peak." The other two winged cavalry warriors were shocked by Rinpoche's action and hurriedly tried to stop him. "Sir, if you touch the rocks on this mountain peak, you will meet with misfortune," one of the winged cavalry warriors quickly said. "What about God? It's very powerful." In the past, there were people who smashed rocks and died not long after. They even implicated the entire village. In less than half a month, hundreds of people died, causing panic. Later, someone found the rock that was brought back and brought it back. The rest of the people were safe and sound, the winged cavalry warrior quickly said, sweating profusely. Looking at his expression, it was obvious that he was shocked. Although these Aboriginals were rough, they were still very respectful of certain things. In particular, they had lived here for generations in the 60,000 mountains and knew that there were many things in the mountains that couldn't be touched. Rinpoche was also shocked by his reaction. If this was the case, then he really couldn't touch it. There were still many strange things in this world. For example, the beachy. For example, this mountain peak in front of him. He immediately put away his spear, cupped his hands toward the mountain peak, and said, "I'm new here and ignorant. Please forgive me if I offended you." After cupping his hands, Rinpoche felt a gust of wind above his head and quickly took a step back. A rock that was half the size of a person fell from the mountain peak, smashed on the ground, and rolled twice. "It's over. This mountain peak is angry." The faces of the two winged cavalry warriors turned pale. It seemed like this mountain peak had a very important place in their hearts. With an innocent look on his face, Rinpoche said, "It was the one who attacked first. It has nothing to do with me, right? It's better to go back and tell Her Majesty," the two winged cavalry warriors said. Rinpoche felt perturbed when he saw the two of them like this. He stopped looking at the mountain peak and followed them back to see the Empress. However, the three of them didn't see that somewhere on the mountain peak, a red fox with fleshy wings was clutching its heart. It had only crawled for a bit, but the stones suddenly fell down, giving it a fright. The three of them went back and explained the situation. The Empress immediately frowned, thought for a while, and said, "Since you didn't bring that rock back, it should be fine. For safety's sake, I'll go with you to take a look. Men, go and hunt some prey as a blood sacrifice." A moment later, the group brought a flower eagle, a black gentleman, and an ape to the mountain peak. The Empress ordered someone to place the prey on the mountain peak, asked the winged cavalry warriors about it, and said some sincere words to the mountain peak. She only left after seeing that nothing else happened. After this incident, Rinpoche gave up on the idea of sightseeing and followed the Empress step by step. Fortunately, nothing much happened the following day, and everyone's hearts were finally at ease. Because of the beachy, there were many twists and turns along the way. Broken axles weren't a problem, but all kinds of natural disasters and beasts happened from time to time. Fortunately, everyone was very strong, and nothing serious happened along the way. However, there were a few winged cavalry warriors who were injured and recuperating. At this time, everyone finally arrived at the first resting point, Ping Village on Mount Pingliang. At this time, the beachy was arching its body and gritting its teeth at a golden-feathered eagle that was circling in the sky. For the past 2 days, whenever it reached a high altitude, this golden-feathered eagle would appear, causing it to be annoyed and itch to immediately bite and eat that fellow in the sky. However, even though it had wings, it couldn't fly. Over the past 2 days, it had been harassed by this golden-feathered eagle many times. Chapter 737. The beachy arched its body and stared at the golden-feathered eagle in the sky. However, the golden-feathered eagle only circled in the air and let out a clear cry from time to time. The golden-feathered eagle wasn't considered a superior predator in the 60,000 mountains. This eagle had a wingspan of 7 to 8 meters, and its iron claws could tear apart a black-haired man of the same level. To ordinary aboriginals, the golden-feathered eagle was a very dangerous existence. However, there were too many ferocious beasts in the 60,000 mountains, and there were many predators in the sky that were more powerful than the golden-feathered eagle. Furthermore, the golden-feathered eagle had an extremely delicate smell. This made the golden-feathered eagle the prey of other beasts if it wasn't careful. Therefore, the golden-feathered eagle was usually very cautious and mostly hunted weak prey like babyasps in the open space of the forest. This time, however, it was different. It had its eyes on the beachy and refused to leave even though it knew that the little fellow below was not easy to deal with. After a while, the beachy rolled its eyes and suddenly leaped toward other trees without looking back. It jumped high and low from tree to tree, exposing its back to the golden-feathered eagle's field of vision from time to time. The golden-feathered eagle in the sky couldn't bear it anymore and swooped down. The golden-feathered eagle could reach 600 kilometers per hour when hunting, but this speed was still too slow in the beachy's eyes. This was especially true in front of the golden-feathered eagle, which played with speed. Just as the golden-feathered eagle was about to pounce on it, the beachy suddenly disappeared from the tree branch. The golden-feathered eagle's huge body and claws broke the fist-thick tree branch and crashed into the dense forest below. The beachy turned into a red line and scurried to another tree before turning back and grabbing at the golden-feathered eagle's neck from the side. In an instant, the golden-feathered eagle's neck was torn in half. Fresh blood sprayed out and emitted an alluring bloody smell in the forest. The golden-feathered eagle wanted to use its iron hook to tear the beachy apart before it died, but it missed. The golden-feathered eagle struggled in mid-air as it smashed a few tree branches and fell. By the time it landed on the ground, it was already half dead. The beachy jumped onto the golden-feathered eagle's back and shook its tail gently. Its small eyes were full of pride. However, it didn't feel proud for long before its eyes widened and its short fur stood on end. Just a few dozen meters away from him, a jet-black fellow was looking at him with a pair of cold and cruel eyes. It was a 4-meter-tall bird. The black fish all over its body emitted a metallic glow. His eyes were filled with ridicule. The beachy was startled by the fact that there was a dire beast here that it hadn't discovered before. However, it was only a slight shock. The beachy jumped down from the body of the golden-feathered eagle. It first took a few tentative steps towards the ferocious beast. Then, it hopped to one side, then to the other side. Its small eyes looked at the black beast for a while, then looked around. The strange black bird just looked at the bouncing beachy with a mocking gaze. It didn't move at all. The beachy seemed to be a little bored. It jumped 10 meters away from the strange bird and raised its head to look at it. It seemed to find this uncomfortable, so it jumped onto a branch and looked down at the strange bird. Only then was it satisfied. "Woof!" The beachy barked. His voice carried a hint of provocation. Then the black bird moved. Like a bolt of black lightning. It crashed directly into the tree beneath the beachy. Boom! More than half of the tree was sent flying. Even though the beachy jumped away in time, it was still shocked by the speed of the black bird. Fast! Very fast! This was the first time it realized that there was such a fast creature besides itself. The black bird rushed to the tree where the beachy was resting. With a flap of its wings, it cut the tree in half like a steel knife. Just like that, the two beasts started fighting in the forest. The beachy fled while the black bird chased. Like a bulldozer, it cleared a path in the forest. One by one, the towering trees fell with a loud crash. Very soon, the Beachy felt like cursing. How could this fellow be so fast? Didn't it feel tired? No matter how fast it ran or how hard it tried to hide, it couldn't shake it off. It was like maggots on a bone. Wherever it went, that fellow followed. It didn't even have a chance to breathe. Ping Village on Mount Pingliang. When the Empress and her party arrived, the entire village naturally came out to welcome them. Everyone in the village came out to welcome the Empress. However, what caught the Empress's attention was that many of them were injured. Renbaqian looked around and saw about 500 to 600 people. The men were wearing animal skin shorts, the women were wearing shorts and tube tops, and only a few elders were wearing cloth clothes. However, many of them were injured. There were at least 20 people with different injuries on their bodies. There were both men and women among them, but without exception, all of them were at the Kismet Heaven level, which was equivalent to the Earth Will level. As for the other four-way heaven villagers, they were fine. Shangping Village welcomes Your Majesty's arrival. This is the first time Your Majesty has returned in more than 10 years. Please don't blame us for coming late. A few elders in cloth clothes came forward and said to the Empress. Even though they looked calm, one could see the worry between their eyebrows. What's going on? The Empress raised her eyebrows and asked. Shangping Village wasn't considered a big village, but because it was close to the forest pillar screen and Yi City, it had always been a place that the Aboriginals had to pass through. As a result, its situation had always been pretty good. Many of the weaker villagers simply gave up the tradition of hunting for a living and became middlemen instead. They were the kind of guides who brought Aboriginals out of the mountains to Yi City to sell herbs and ores, as well as to buy salt and iron for a small fee. Furthermore, this was the periphery of Shangping Village. There weren't any ferocious beasts around it, so it had always been very peaceful. However, it seemed like there was a problem now, especially with the injured Kismet Heaven martial artists in the stronghold. If he remembered correctly, the Shangping stronghold rarely fought with others. They had also recruited people from other strongholds, so there were at least 60 to 70 Kismet Heaven martial artists in the stronghold. Now, only 20 of them had come out. Where were the rest? Your Majesty, you must be tired. Please enter the village and rest. The elders didn't answer and instead invited the Empress into the village. Shangping Village wasn't a big village, but there were many stone houses in it. Many of them were empty and could be used by the Aboriginals to rest. Furthermore, they didn't charge any fees. It was precisely because of the important location of Shangping Village and this method that it had a good reputation among the other villages. The moment Rinpochen entered the village, he smelled the lingering smell of blood. He looked in the direction of the smell and saw 7 or 8 corpses placed at the side with straw mats covering them. What the hell is going on? I want to hear it, the Empress asked. The elders hesitated for a while before replying, we didn't want to disturb Your Majesty. A few months ago, a crow general appeared out of nowhere and settled down nearby. It was extremely powerful, and the people in the village wanted to drive it away at first. However, many of them were injured instead. Nowadays, the people in the village are often attacked by it when they go hunting. If this continues, I'm afraid we won't be able to stay in Shangping Village. The Empress raised her eyebrows and asked, a Cardinal Heaven Crow General? Yes. It must be a Cardinal Heaven expert. Over the past few days, 31 Kismet Heaven experts have been killed or injured by it. The elders nodded. Renbaqian looked at the Empress thoughtfully and asked, Your Majesty, there aren't many crow generals with such strength, right? I've rarely heard of them. Gongzheng, the commander of the winged cavalry, replied. Renbaqian nodded. Last year, he had seen a crow general with this kind of strength in Tianjing Basin. It was one of the 3 most powerful strange beasts in the 6 doors. During the final battle, all the other people and strange beasts were killed, but that crow general escaped. This one couldn't be that one, right? After all, such a powerful beast had its own territory and wouldn't easily move to an unfamiliar place. In particular, this was the periphery of the 60,000 mountains, where such a powerful beast shouldn't appear. In particular, it was a rare beast like the crow general. If it was the one in Tianjing Basin, it would make sense. Renbachien didn't know how it came here from Tianjing Basin. Soon, he became excited again. He was envious of that crow general. Not only was it powerful, but it also had extraordinary strength and a body like steel. Most importantly, it could be ridden. Back then, he saw that crow general run away with Taitu Mongshan and that monkey on its back. If the Empress could subdue this crow general, it would be a good thing. Although it wasn't as awe-inspiring as Chishui the Kirin, it was still a top-notch mount. Most importantly, they had obtained records of this crow general from the 6 doors when they were clearing them out. Chapter 738. Renbachien thought that the Empress would immediately send people to search for traces of the crow general. However, she didn't. Instead, the winged cavalry warriors were scattered outside while the Empress and Renbachien rested in the largest house in the village. The environment was simple and crude, but there wasn't much to dislike in this place. Even though the Empress wouldn't mistreat herself, she wouldn't be picky about the kindness of her people. They rested for a night. The next day, the Empress brought Renbachien, Gongjing, and a few elders to the back of the village, where piles of stones were densely placed. Renbachien immediately guessed what they were when he saw their shapes. These were the graves of this village. There were only a few hundred people in the village, but there were at least thousands of these stones. Some of the stones were larger and were scattered among them, making up about 1/10 of the total. Most of the stones were stacked together with a dozen fist-sized stones. First, someone brought a wooden basin of water over. Following which, the Empress stood in front of the graves and said in a deep voice, "I'm the monarch of Dayo and the ruler of the Aboriginals. Today, I'm here to ask if the souls of the ancestors are willing to protect Dayo." There wasn't much etiquette. The Empress simply stood there and asked a simple question. With these words, a gust of wind blew through the air. The elder in the village put a thin branch into the basin, and it immediately stood firmly in the water as if it had taken root. The Empress cupped her fists and said, "Thank you very much. As long as I'm on the throne, I will naturally seek a better life for my people. Everyone, please protect Dayo and the Aboriginals." Gongjang and the other elders also cupped their fists. Upon seeing their actions, Renbachien imitated them and cupped his fists. Everyone turned around and returned. There were no offerings, no livestock, nothing at all. It was just a simple question, a simple tree branch, and a simple answer. After returning to the village, Renbachien asked, "Your Majesty, what happened just now?" "I didn't come before, but now that I'm here, I have to greet you," the Empress said casually. "Are the souls of the ancestors really still there?" Renbachien asked softly. The Empress looked at him strangely and asked, "Why do you ask? Didn't they answer?" "I just find it a little unbelievable." When Renbachien recalled the scene where the tree branch stood motionlessly in the water, he still felt that it was somewhat unbelievable. Although he had heard many people mention that the souls of the soldiers who died in battle would follow their heads back to the 60,000 mountains and turn into heroic spirits to protect the Aboriginals, and he knew that there were many strange things about this world, he was still surprised to see such a scene. Do we need to offer some sacrifices to those heroic souls? Renbachien asked again. Of course. Gongjang and the elders in the village will send the blood food in a while. The Empress nodded. I feel that it's a little weird. Most people offer sacrifices first before asking for blessings and blessings, but it's different when it comes to Her Majesty. The other party agrees first before you give them blood food. Renbochin felt like laughing. If they don't agree, will Her Majesty demolish their homes? How could that be? I am not a muddle-headed person who brings disaster to the country. How could they not agree? Isn't it natural for ancestors to protect their descendants? The Empress felt that Renbochien's way of thinking was rather strange. As for the blood sacrifice that will be sent later, I will be there personally to offer sacrifices. They won't be able to afford it. The Empress said. Isn't it natural for descendants to offer sacrifices to their ancestors? Why wouldn't they be able to afford it? Renbochien returned the Empress's words. This is what the late emperor said. He naturally has his reasons for saying this. The Empress immediately shut Renbochien up. The late emperor that the Empress was talking about was naturally the first emperor of Dayo and not her father. Renbochien turned his head to look at the back of the mountain and suddenly wondered if the Empress would also be staying in this mountain a few hundred years later. What about himself? This was a question that was worth investigating. At the thought of this, Renbochien asked the Empress. The Empress immediately stopped in her tracks with an unhappy look on her face. After thinking about it, she seriously said, "You and I are married, so you are an aboriginal. If any of them don't agree, I will beat them up until they agree." There was nothing that couldn't be solved with a beating. If there was, then he would beat them up again. When the two of them returned to the village, someone went to Gongzheng and whispered a few words to him. Then, Gongzheng came to report to the Empress. Renbochien then realized that even though the Empress didn't say anything, the winged cavalry was already investigating the news of the Crow General. The results were sent back very quickly. Dozens of kilometers away, there was a large area of destroyed trees. The Crow General seemed to have gone crazy and was wantonly destroying the forest and drawing a circle. Some people also guessed that it was chasing something. However, the Crow General was known for its speed, and there weren't many things in this world that a Cardinal Heaven Crow General couldn't catch up to. After knowing the General's location, the Empress personally led the team to capture the Crow General. However, her thoughts were different from Renbochien's. Renbochien felt that the Crow General was easy to ride, and the Empress had long heard that it tasted good, especially its wings, which were the most tender and delicious. It was a pity that there were very few Crow Generals, and they had never been heard of in the vicinity of Lon City. Furthermore, this was a Cardinal Heaven Crow General. It had escaped the last time, so she couldn't let it escape again. The Beachy finally understood what it meant to feel like. It was feeling like this now. Initially, it saw how big that fellow was and felt that it was very strong, but it still relied on its speed to jump around in front of it. As a result, it had been chased by that fellow for an entire day and was so tired that its tongue was hanging out. However, that fellow still didn't give up and seemed as if it wouldn't give up until it caught it. Now, with every lap it ran, the forest that was destroyed by that big fellow expanded. If that fellow wasn't nearby, it would have already run into the depths of the forest. Now, it was hesitating whether it should run into the forest first and find an opportunity to turn back. Just as it was trying to figure out what to do, it realized that it had been blocked in front of it. However, it was overjoyed and rushed toward the red figure in the middle of the crowd. Then, it scratched the face of the bastard beside her a few times before jumping into the crowd. The Crow General didn't stop when it saw the people in front of it. Its eyes were bloodshot as it rushed toward the Empress in red. Red was a taboo for the Crow General. It would get excited at the sight of this color. It was as if it were on steroids. Its mind was filled with the thought of tearing that fellow into pieces. However, halfway through, it recognized the woman in red. After all, the intelligence of a Cardinal Heaven-level beast wasn't much lower than that of a human. Even a dog had the intelligence of an 8-year-old child, let alone a Cardinal Heaven-level beast. Back then, the entire 6 doors was destroyed by a group of people led by the woman in red. The Iron-Head Mang Mountain and the Scarlet Monkey, which were about as strong as it, were killed in that battle. It was the only one who escaped. How could it not remember? Run! The group watched as the 4-meter-tall Crow General charged at them with bloodshot eyes, as if it had taken drugs. They thought it had recognized them and wanted to take revenge, but it suddenly braked and turned around to flee. Everyone immediately knew that this was the same one that appeared in Tianjing Basin last year. In fact, based on its size, everyone was almost certain. However, just as it turned its head, a figure swept past its neck. A 2-inch-long sharp fingernail shot out from a finger and scratched the feathers on its neck. It was like metal colliding with metal, accompanied by an ear-piercing friction sound, and actually burst into sparks. Lin Qiaola. She swept past the Crow General like the wind and looked at her fingernails with a pained expression on her face. This fellow was too tough. She attacked again, and every move she made was aimed at the Crow General's unusually large eyes. The Crow General was anxious to escape and fought desperately. It flapped its iron wings toward Lin Qiaola, causing a gust of wind to blow away the weeds on the ground. It then jumped up and clawed at Lin Qiaola with its iron claws. Even if she was made of iron, it would still leave a hole in her. "Where do you think you're going now?" the Empress sneered. She took a step forward, and an imposing aura emanated from her body that pressed down on the Crow General like a mountain. She took another step forward and was already behind the Crow General. She slapped the Crow General with her palm. The Crow General turned its body and collided with the Empress's iron wings. Even Renbaqian and the others in the distance could feel the airflow from the collision, let alone in the middle of the arena. The ground rolled up like a lake with a stone thrown into it. The Empress's upper body swayed, but the Crow General staggered. The Crow General's iron feathers were comparable to steel. It was extremely fast and powerful, and it had almost no natural enemies. Moreover, it was a cardinal heaven-level beast. However, it was still at a disadvantage when facing the Empress, who hadn't used her full strength. Purple patterns began to appear on the Empress's face, and her aura rose steadily. It was as if Renbaqian saw a mountain climbing higher and higher. My Extraterrestrial Ruins, a book by a crossdresser. Chapter 739. What did it feel like to have a mountain fall on you? It covered the sky. It was a landslide. Even though the Empress's punch wasn't that powerful, it made people feel as if a mountain had fallen on them. The Empress's fist was like a mountain. All the spectators felt the same way, let alone the Crow General in the middle of the field. Boom! The 4-meter-tall Crow General disappeared in an instant. A huge pit with a radius of nearly 100 meters appeared on the ground. The deepest part of the pit was 20 to 30 meters deep. The Crow General was smashed to the bottom of the pit by the Empress's punch, and it spat out mouthfuls of blood. Even though the Crow General had iron feathers and steel bones, it couldn't withstand the Empress's punch, and many of its bones were broken. "Catch it!" the Empress said faintly as she stood at the edge of the pit with her hands behind her back. The purple veins on the surface of her skin gradually faded, and her skin returned to its original smooth and jade-like appearance. "If Ting Yu were to meet you now, I'm afraid that he wouldn't be able to withstand a single punch from you," Renbaqian said. Even though the Empress was extremely powerful in the past, she wasn't this terrifying. Renbaqian didn't know what she had comprehended last year that allowed her strength to improve so much. The Empress didn't look very happy. She turned to look at Renbaqian and said, "Ting Yu is the 4th most powerful expert in the world because his spear is unparalleled in the world. Even though I've improved a little, it will still take some effort to defeat him. You have obtained his golden spear and his comprehension. If you cultivate diligently, you might be able to reach his height." The Empress had put in a lot of effort for Renbachien. However, Renbachien licked his lips and said, "It's fine as long as I can advance to the next level. As for fighting, that's not suitable for me." He really wasn't interested in fighting. However, he was still interested in practicing martial arts. At least he could live longer. "Your Majesty, what should we do with this crow general?" Renbachien asked again. "I heard that its wing root tastes good," the Empress said as she stared at the crow general that was being carried over. Even the Empress might not be able to eat such a top-notch delicacy. It depended more on luck. Lin Chala squatted at the side and drooled as she stared at the crow general's neck. The half-dead crow general was being carried over. When it heard this, it shivered. It was afraid that it would really be eaten this time. "Your Majesty, it's a cardinal heaven-level beast. Isn't it a waste to eat it?" Renbachien asked. If the crow general could nod its head, it would be pecking away like a chick. Unfortunately, the Empress's punch had shattered many of its bones. Now, it was on its last breath, and its head drooped weakly to the side. "What do you think?" The Empress could tell what was on Renbachien's mind. "If I can subdue it, I'll have another vicious beast that I can control. Even as a mount." Renbachien felt that it would be a waste to eat it. If eating the crow general could increase one's strength or extend one's lifespan, he would have already prepared a pot. However, the crow general's meat only contained a little more energy at most and had some other uses. In fact, it was meaningless to someone as powerful as the Empress and not very useful to Renbachien. Just like that giant crocodile. In that case, he might as well try to subdue it. The Empress looked a little regretful. Compared to subduing the crow general, she was more interested in tasting it. Was it as delicious as the rumors made it out to be? However, seeing that Renbachien was interested, she had no choice but to say, "Go ahead and ask. If it's willing to surrender, I'll spare its life. Otherwise, I'll kill it. Its wings are quite big, so we can roast one and steam the other." The Empress had even thought of how to eat it. The crow general wasn't very courageous to begin with. The only reason it looked so ferocious was because it was powerful. If the Empress could spare its life, it would naturally be very willing. Hearing that the Empress was studying how to eat its wings scared it half to death. It wanted to surrender, but it couldn't do so and could only helplessly vomit blood. Renbachien looked at the crow general. This fellow was at the cardinal heaven level, and he might not be able to persuade it to surrender. He still had to use some other methods. After asking someone to carry the crow general back to the village, Renbachien asked someone to catch some birds. The crow general caused quite a commotion when it was carried back to the village. If the winged cavalry warriors hadn't stopped it, it would have been stoned to death. Finally, it was placed in a corner of the village. Everyone was afraid that it would still have the strength to fight to the death, so they tied it up tightly. After a long time, Renbachien finally came over while the crow general anxiously looked at him. "Why don't you ask me?" "I'll surrender if you ask me. I've gathered some strength now, so I can still nod my head." However, Renbachien didn't have any intention of asking it. He first asked the people from the imperial kitchen to bring 2 large birds over and set them on fire in front of the crow general. He first roasted the large birds on the rack, then cleaned the charred feathers on their bodies before preparing the 2 birds. 1 pair of wings was placed on the fire to roast. The other pair was marinated in a basin and would be made into honey bird wings later. One of the necks was made into spicy bird neck and the other into smoked bird neck. Renbachien asked someone to find some stones to heat over the fire before slicing off the breast meat and frying it. As for the legs, 1 pair was fried and the other pair was stewed with herbs. There were also the heads, livers, hearts, and stomachs. Renbachien cut these 2 birds into 8 pieces and made 16 dishes. From time to time, he would give pointers to the people from the imperial kitchen on how to prepare the parts. Finally, he didn't even spare the bones of the birds and asked them to make a stone frame for the birds. The Crow General trembled as it watched. It was so anxious that it was trembling. "Why don't you ask me if I surrender or not? Why don't you ask me? Why don't you ask me?" Its eyes were about to spit fire. If it could jump up now, it would definitely fight to the death with Renbochin. Renbochin also paid attention to the Crow General's expression. He couldn't tell anything else, but the anger in its eyes was obvious. He sighed to himself that it wasn't easy to subdue a cardinal heaven-level beast. Before long, the aroma of roasted meat wafted over. Lin Chaola came out of nowhere and squatted there, drooling as she looked at the roasted wings on the fire. From time to time, she would look at the neck of the Black General as if she was measuring its taste. Renbochin asked someone to give one of the wings to the Empress, threw the other to Lin Chaola, and went to fry the breast meat. After a busy afternoon, he made more than 10 dishes. Some of them were given to the Empress while the rest were eaten in front of the Crow General. After all, it was a bird, and no matter how powerful it was still a type of bird. It would definitely feel sad to see Renbochin torturing other birds in this way. To put it simply, he was killing the chicken to warn the monkeys. This was the consequence of cooking a feast of bird meat in front of the Crow General if it didn't surrender. Chapter 740. "How is it?" the Empress asked casually when she saw Renbochin enter. However, the result was obvious from his expression. "That fellow is quite unyielding. I roasted the birds in front of it for the whole afternoon, but it ignored me," Renbochin said. However, it made sense when he thought about it. They had killed its original owner and companions, and it was the only one who escaped. Now, it was beaten half to death. Even if it was a beast, it still had its pride. What's more, it was a cardinal heaven-level beast. "Otherwise, I'll just kill it." The Empress didn't care. Having one more cardinal heaven expert or one less cardinal heaven expert didn't matter to her. As long as one could stand in the imperial court, no one was weaker than this. She only took a step back when she saw that Renbochin wanted to subdue it. In fact, it would be better if he didn't subdue it since she would be able to eat the best delicacy in the world. "I'll try again tomorrow. Before I left, I told it that if it doesn't surrender tomorrow, it will suffer the same fate as those 2 birds today. I'll pluck its feathers and then cut its body into 8 pieces. Each part will be separately roasted, braised, steamed, and stewed in an iron pot." The Empress couldn't help but glance at him strangely. That was indeed the case, but why did it sound so awkward? The next day, Renbochin sent someone to take the 2 large birds to the vicinity of the Crow General early in the morning. The Crow General stared at him with a murderous look. "Why didn't you ask me if I surrendered? You didn't even ask. How do you know if I'll surrender or not? Don't look at me like that. Heaven is virtuous and all living things are equal. Although you are a beast, you are still alive. That's why I'm temporarily protecting you from Her Majesty. However, I can only protect you for 1 day. If you don't surrender today, I'm afraid that you will suffer the same fate as this unlucky fellow in my hands." Renbochin used the fire to roast the bird's feathers while speaking unconvincing words. In fact, when he saw the look in the Crow General's eyes, he felt that he might have underestimated the situation. This Crow General probably wouldn't be easy to subdue. If it didn't repent, he would kill it for another day and feed it to the Empress. The Empress had been thinking about this bird for a long time. The Crow General lay on the ground, so angry that the sack on its neck bulged. The Crow General's throat had a sack of meat that was used to store food. Normally, it would be hard to tell if it was empty. If it was filled with food, it would be able to bulge out a huge meat sack. However, when the flesh pouch bulged, there was a gap in the feathers that were originally tightly covering it, and there was also an opening on the neck. Now, it was as if the meat sack was filled with air and had completely swelled up. Even the iron feather on his throat couldn't block it, revealing the scarlet skin underneath. Look, this is the neck. It can be roasted, smoked, or stir-fried. It can even be stewed with a good taste. After all, the neck of a bird is flexible, and the meat on it is tender. Renbochin said unhurriedly as he swiftly chopped off the neck. After dealing with the neck, he dealt with the bird's head, then the bird's body, the bird's wings, and the bird's legs. The crow general couldn't move and could only listen to Renbochin's words, feeling both angry and cold. I won't end up being dismembered and eaten like this, right? Damn bastard. I want to surrender, but why don't you ask me? Ever since it was seriously injured by that punch yesterday, it had been left here. After a day, its injuries didn't improve and instead worsened. It even wondered if it would die in such a sullen manner. After another morning, Renbochin made more than a dozen dishes. He sighed when he saw that the crow general was still looking at him with a murderous gaze. He sat cross-legged near the crow general and asked, "I'll ask you again. Are you going to surrender? If you don't, you will be my dish tonight. If you surrender, you will be my mount in the future." When the crow general heard what Renbochin wanted to hear, it almost shed tears. This was the first time it realized how difficult it was to surrender. That bastard had been cooking in front of it for 2 days and was finally asking it a question. It was afraid that Renbochin would misunderstand and wanted to nod frantically. However, after a night, the strength that it had accumulated with great difficulty yesterday had gradually dissipated. It could only move its head slightly and nod. Are you nodding or shaking your head? Renbochin was pleasantly surprised when he saw that the huge bird lying on the ground moved its head. It didn't respond for the entire afternoon yesterday, but it was finally willing to move now. If you surrender, move your head a little, Renbochin said again. The crow general moved again. This time, Renbochin was pleasantly surprised. This fellow had been staring at him with a murderous gaze, and he thought that he had no chance. He didn't expect it to surrender all of a sudden. Could this be a trap? Animals wouldn't surrender first and then rebel after their injuries were healed, right? Are you really surrendering? Renbochin asked. The crow general had used up almost all of its strength after moving a few times. It didn't even have the strength to be angry now. After squeezing out the last bit of strength in its body, the crow general finally nodded slightly. Surrender. It really surrendered. Can you please stop asking? Can't you treat my injuries first? Renbochin looked at it for a long time, trying to figure out what it was thinking. Although he couldn't tell what it was planning, he finally realized that its eyes were dim and its breathing was weak. It seemed like it wasn't far from death. He quickly asked someone to treat its injuries so that it wouldn't die. Then, he rushed back to see the Empress. In any case, he had subdued the crow general this time. It was a capable general and a good mount. Your Majesty. Renbochin saw the radio in front of the Empress as soon as he entered the room. She seemed to be thinking about something. Let's talk about it later, the Empress waved her hand and said without turning her head. She tapped her fingers on the table twice before speaking into the radio and asking, Great Elder, what do you think? What Lin Mengxing said should be true, but the specific decision still depends on what your Majesty thinks. In my opinion, although the Yun nation is bound to perish, Dayo doesn't have that many officials and can only make an exception to promote people from the bottom. As for the effect, we can only take it one step at a time. According to him, these people will be useful in the future. This time, they surrendered to Dayo and won't rebel easily. Even if they rebel, they won't amount to much. Furthermore, they are warlords of their respective cities, so it's a good choice for them to manage the people of the Yun nation. With these people leading the way, I believe that Protector Z will be able to present the Yun nation's emperor before your majesty's wedding and add a joyous atmosphere to your majesty's wedding. Great Elder Shi Qing's voice was heard from the radio. The Empress nodded and immediately said, "Z Dong Lai. I'm here." Another cold man's voice was heard. Chapter 741. Although the imperial power of the Yun nation was supreme, the warlords of each city were actually hereditary. Their heirs would take over and consolidate the strength of the family in a region from generation to generation. After hundreds of years, the warlords were more or less like local tyrants. The so-called imperial power was just a title in name. According to the history of China, it was almost a replica of the emperors and the feudal lords. However, the feudal lords were replaced by the warlords here. The warlords were divided into factions, and the relationships were extremely complicated. Even if the emperor of the Yun nation wanted to change, it would be difficult for him to do so. However, the lives of the warlords of the Yun nation, who were originally tyrannical, were extremely difficult. In particular, the corpses of the original owners of most of the cities on the front line of Dao's army were now scattered on some rocky hills. There were also a few who saw that the situation was not good and threw everything away in time to escape with their lives. The current state of the battle had caused everyone to be alarmed. The officials in the remaining cities were also in a state of panic. In particular, two of the warlords who were facing the front line of Dao's army ran away when they saw that the situation was not good. The rest also sent their families and children away. However, the warlords who had lost their cities were no different from drowning dogs. Just as they ran back to Wang capital with a glimmer of hope, Xing Qingmian found an excuse to behead them. There was a strong army outside, but there was also a prime minister who was eyeing the warlords covetously. Even though Xing Qingmian finally believed that Dao was preparing to destroy the Yun nation and was prepared to fight to the death with the last of his troops, he still didn't show any mercy to the warlords who had abandoned their cities. They would die if they ran back. However, they would also die if they didn't. Nearly half of the 200 cities had fallen into the hands of Dao. Even the most optimistic people had an extremely mournful attitude toward this war. Not to mention the warlords who were well aware of the military strength of both sides. Now, some of the warlords had begun to drink and indulge in debauchery every day. They were unscrupulously preparing to enjoy their last days. It was as if the cities were covered by dark clouds, and the atmosphere of despair was freely spreading. At this moment, a person appeared. It was Lin Mengxing, a young scholar in his 30s. He had a glib tongue and persuaded many warlords to surrender to Dao. There were a total of 47 cities between Wang capital and Dao's frontline. It could be said that once these 47 cities were opened, there would be no more barriers in Wang capital except for the 3 defense cities. Given the current situation and the military strength of Dao and the Yun nation, surrendering seemed to be a wise choice, but it wasn't. Many people had such thoughts but didn't implement them in the end. First, the Aboriginals had a bad reputation in the Yun nation. Secondly, surrendering to the non-humankind would be a stain that would go down in history. Their descendants wouldn't be able to raise their heads in the future. Secondly, there were people who wanted to surrender at the front lines, but at that time, when the enemy was at the city gates, how could Zi Donglai accept it? Fourth, they still had to consider. Even if they were to Dao. Now that there was a war, no one knew where those people had hidden themselves. But if they surrendered, they would have to bear the infamy of being cursed. Who knew when those experts would appear from somewhere and kill everyone in the city lord's mansion? They could even spread their chivalrous reputation among the people. As a result, the idea of surrendering was only in the minds of some people. However, Lin Mengxing somehow obtained some information about the current situation of Dao's prisoner camps and used it to infer the changes in the Aboriginals. He convinced dozens of warlords and personally went to the front line to seek an audience with Zedong. After listening to the Empress, Renbaqian asked, "What's his purpose?" Hearing Renbaqian's question, the Empress's expression immediately became strange. "I heard that his teacher and a few of his fellow disciples were assassinated by Jingqingmian on their way to the capital." Renbaqian was speechless. If he remembered correctly, that was done by the people from the rearguard commandery. If that was the case, then the people from the rearguard commandery had really made a great contribution. Regardless of whether this person was telling the truth, it was fine as long as these people surrendered. So what if this person wanted to use this contribution as a way to advance? Dao indeed lacked such talents. The Empress had similar thoughts. "I'm afraid this person has other plans, and I don't like such people." Renbaqian felt that the Empress's preferences were normal. No matter who it was, they didn't like traitors. An official who is loyal but can't bring benefits to the people, or an official who has his own thoughts but can get things done. "Which one do you want to use, Your Majesty?" Renbaqian raised this question. In fact, this was a question that the Empress had to face sooner or later. In the past, there were only aboriginals in the imperial court, and there weren't many other people that could be used. The Empress had never considered this question. The aboriginals were said to be simple because of their straightforward temperament. On the other hand, Dao was really poor and didn't have many colorful things to baptize them with. However, people would always change. It was the same for the aboriginals. As Dao changed bit by bit, every aboriginal official had to undergo this baptism test. Not to mention the people from the Yun nation and the Jing tribe. The Empress would need to use them sooner or later. It wasn't a good thing to have the aboriginals on top of the other races. Renbaqian simply took this opportunity to raise this question. The Empress pondered upon hearing Renbaqian's question. "Of course, I like loyal officials. However, if I can't satisfy both sides, I'll use the second option." "Is this what you mean?" the Empress said after thinking carefully. Renbaqian applauded and said, "As expected of Your Majesty, you understood immediately. You seem to like using these people? It has been like this since the beginning of the Jing tribe." The Empress looked at him. "Your Majesty, although the aboriginals are loyal, there are many things that they can't do. Furthermore, we don't have too many of these powerless officials. We can't possibly send ordinary people over to be officials, right? That would definitely create a mess. His Majesty had to use these people. Whether it's for Dao or for the people." Renbaqian immediately said. In all fairness, he did like to use people who weren't aboriginals. The aboriginals were indeed very powerful. However, this kind of power had nothing to do with construction. It was about destruction. What he wanted to do was construction. Those who weren't strong but were smarter than the people from the Jing tribe and the Yun nation would be more useful. However, this would inevitably lead to the gradual entry of non-aboriginals into the imperial court. When facing the powerful aboriginals, they would definitely band together. Such an outcome would make it easy for others to suspect him because he wasn't an aboriginal. Furthermore, he was the one who created that situation. This was something that he had long understood. "I understand, and I won't doubt you." The Empress sighed. How could she not understand? It was just that Dao had always been the aboriginals' Dao. This kind of life seemed to be about to change. Renbaqian held the Empress's palm and transferred his warmth to her. Chapter 742. Renbaqian stayed in the stronghold for a day and a half. Other than subduing the Black General, he also spent a day teaching the people in the stronghold how to make ice and smoke. It wasn't because the weather was unbearably hot, but because food was difficult to preserve. It was difficult for the villagers to store food, and if they didn't catch enough prey in a few days, the entire village would starve. This wasn't an isolated case. It wasn't just one or two villages, but the situation in most of the villages in the 60,000 mountains. Relatively speaking, Shangping village was closer to the forest pillar screen and Yi city, so the situation was better. It was said that the situation in the depths of the 60,000 mountains was better because the villages there were strong, and the prey there was also strong. The stronger the prey, the slower the energy dissipation in its body and the longer it could be preserved. Only the weaker villages that were further away from Yi city had it the hardest. Renbochin simply taught them the method of making ice, told them how to find saltpeter, and told them to dig ice cellars. This way, they could store more game that they hunted and take it out when their harvest was low. The people of Shangping village were shocked when they learned how to make ice and successfully made it. They had heard from people that there was ice in the depths of the 60,000 mountains, but they only treated it as a strange story. They didn't expect to be able to make something that emitted cold air. Then, they were ecstatic. With this thing, meat could be stored for a long time. Everyone looked at Renbochin with a completely different attitude. There was a trace of kindness in their eyes. The thinking of these aboriginals was very simple. Whoever had the biggest fist would be respected. Whoever could give them a good life would also be respected. Furthermore, Renbochin's current strength wasn't considered weak. Although he was still far from the Empress, he was considered pretty good compared to the ordinary aboriginals. He immediately gained a lot of goodwill by teaching them the method of making ice. Compared to the time he had spent in Lon City, a simple method of making ice here was enough to make everyone in the village look at him warmly. The girls in the village also began to throw flirtatious glances at him. Even though it was just a stronghold, the Aboriginal women had strong and healthy bodies. Their skin was as smooth as satin, and their looks were above average, which made him rather happy. Unfortunately, this situation only lasted for a moment before the team set off again. After that, the Empress, Renbochin, and the rest passed by dozens of villages. Other than Shangping village, where they stayed for a longer period of time, they stayed at the other villages for at most one night or only for a short while. They stayed at the graveyard near the village for a short while, doing the same things and saying the same things as they did at Shangping village. The result was the same. In every village, after the Empress said those words to the graveyard's gravestones, the tree branches stuck into the water as if they were stuck into gravel. After her hands left, they didn't move at all. That was the acknowledgement and answer of the deceased ancestors to the Empress. There were no soul-stirring promises, only tree branches standing in the water. During this time, the Crow General had finally recovered from its injuries. It behaved itself and didn't even try to escape. It was just that when she looked at Renbochin, she always had a strange expression. It was as if there was a mixture of hatred and other emotions in her eyes. She didn't like him at all. This puzzled Renbochin. The one who hid it was the Empress, and the one who saved it was Renbochin. In the end, when it saw the Empress, it behaved itself and didn't like Renbochin. Could it be that these ferocious beasts only recognized fists? Or did this Crow General have masochistic tendencies and get a kick out of being beaten by the Empress? This made Renbochin ponder whether this Crow General was a male or a female, and he looked at it strangely. As a result, the Crow General didn't like him at all. However, under the Empress's order, it had no choice but to carry Renbochin and become his mount. This time, Renbochin's Alto was replaced by a Maserati. With a Cardinal Heaven mount, Renbochin was able to enjoy the thrill of causing chaos wherever he went. Although this Crow General wasn't a match for the Empress, it could still be considered a tyrant in the periphery and central regions of the 60,000 mountains. After traveling for 20 days in a row and covering a distance of more than 500 kilometers in a straight line, everyone finally passed through the periphery of the 60,000 mountains. Renbochin landed behind the Empress and looked up at her from time to time as she sat on Qi Shui. The Empress had been a little quiet these past 2 days. Although she never spoke much, there was something different about her. This was especially true when he teased her. However, the Empress had been acting a little strange these past 2 days, as if she had something on her mind. It was said that one was timid when approaching home. However, Song Jiwen, who said, feeling even more timid when approaching home and not daring to ask who is coming, had escaped from Lingnan and didn't know if his crime had brought disaster to his family, so he naturally felt timid when approaching home. After that, this saying spread for a long time because people who had left home for a long time were afraid that their hometown was gone, and they panicked because they didn't know if their relatives and friends were dead or alive. However, this didn't exist for the Empress at all. Not to mention returning home in glory, the Empress shouldn't feel timid when approaching home. For example, the Empress hadn't said a word this morning. Renbaqian urged his mount forward to ride alongside the Empress. However, no matter how hard he tried to urge the Crow General to ride alongside Chishui, it didn't dare to do so no matter what. It wasn't that the Kirin had any power over the Crow General. It was just that the back of the Crow General was a little high. It was nearly 3 meters off the ground and half a meter taller than the Kirin. The Empress had to raise her head to talk to Renbaqian. Then, the Crow General suffered a kick. It was sent flying more than 70 meters away and almost suffered another serious injury. At that time, the Crow General was about to cry. Was it my fault for being tall? Seeing that the cowardly Crow General didn't dare to go forward, Renbaqian jumped onto Qi Shui's back. He sat behind the Empress and held her waist with both hands. He could feel the softness of her waist under the veil. It's hot. The Empress pushed his hands away. It's natural to feel cool when you're calm. Your Majesty, if you can't calm down, you'll naturally feel hot. Renbaqian unyieldingly placed his hands on her waist again. He was already prepared to be elbowed down at any time. However, it was indeed hot. He could feel the heat from the Empress's body even though he was sitting behind her. It would be strange if the two of them weren't feeling hot on such a hot day. On the contrary, Qi Shui's body emitted a slight coolness that made people feel more comfortable. Seeing that the Empress wasn't reacting, Renbaqian asked, "Do you have any thoughts, Your Majesty?" Mount Yulong is in front, and the Ye family village is above it. The Empress said. The name of the first emperor was Yepeng, and the Ye family village was the ancestor of the royal family. Your Majesty, you haven't been back for a long time, so you should be smiling more. I see that you're a little depressed. Is it related to the Ye family village? Renbaqian thought for a moment. It definitely wasn't related to a village, but to the people in the village. There's someone in the village right now, and I don't know how to face him, the Empress said faintly. Renbaqian's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. Could it be that the Empress had a childhood sweetheart? Logically speaking, it wasn't impossible for the Empress to have been here more than 10 years ago. Fortunately, he was the victor and was about to pluck the most beautiful and precious flower in Dayo. Otherwise, he would really be jealous. Renbaqian relaxed his tone and smiled as he asked, "Who could actually make Your Majesty feel so uneasy?" "My brother." Chapter 743. When Renbaqian heard the Empress say, "My elder brother," he thought to himself, what the f*ck. I have a brother-in-law. Why didn't he know about this? I've never heard of it before. Speaking of which, the previous emperor actually had an heir. Or son. How did the Empress ascend the throne? Naturally, Renbaqian didn't know that before the Empress brought him to Great Xia, she had left a message for the officials to bring another person back if she couldn't make it back. If he hadn't fainted at that time, he might have been able to make some guesses. But he didn't hear it at that time, and he didn't hear anyone mention it after that, so he didn't think there was such a person. After all, this wasn't a matriarchal society. The Empress, who was a woman, had become the Empress of Deo. He naturally assumed that the previous emperor only had one son, Qi Zixiao. However, at this moment, the Empress actually mentioned his brother-in-law. Furthermore, he had never heard of it before. It was as if a monkey had jumped out from a crack in a rock, which shocked Renbaqian. "Your Majesty, is he your biological son?" Renbaqian couldn't help but ask after recovering from his shock. Bang! Renbaqian was sent flying more than 10 meters away by the Empress's elbow. He rubbed his chest, got up, jumped onto Qi Shui's back, and asked, "Do I have to call you brother-in-law?" Bang! Renbaqian was elbowed again. Renbaqian stubbornly climbed back onto Qi Shui's back. "Your Majesty," the Empress ignored him. "Are you not on good terms with my brother-in-law?" This time, the Empress finally replied, "I was fine when I was young." Just as he was about to listen to what she was going to say, the Empress shut her mouth again. She stared blankly into the distance, lost in thought. No one knew what she was thinking about. Seeing that the Empress didn't say anything, Renbaqian pondered whether he should treat his brother-in-law warmly or coldly. According to the Empress, their relationship was good when they were young, but it seemed like it wasn't good now. If he was too enthusiastic, the Empress might not be happy. However, if Renbaqian was indifferent, the Empress would probably still be unhappy if Renbaqian was indifferent to her brother-in-law. After all, the Empress still had feelings for him. It could be seen from her uneasiness these 2 days. To be able to make someone like the Empress feel uneasy, even if they were related by blood, it still proved something. No matter what he did, it didn't seem to work. This was a suicidal question. During the lunch break, Renbaqian went to the winged cavalry to ask about his brother-in-law in a roundabout way. However, when everyone heard what he wanted to ask, their expressions immediately changed, and they shut their mouths. This piqued Renbaqian's curiosity. What kind of person could actually cause these burly winged cavalry warriors to turn pale at the mention of him? In the end, he finally heard something from his student. The Empress did have an elder brother. He was called Qi Ziding. As for the rest, there were only 2 things. Firstly, it was said that he was an extremely bloodthirsty person. Previously, he was the one overseeing the protectorate of the Northeast. Secondly, he had assassinated the previous emperor. Even his own students didn't know the specifics. They had only heard about it by chance. The results of his inquiries made Renbaqian a little fearful of this brother-in-law whom he had never met before. He didn't seem easy to deal with. "I'll just play it by ear." However, these 2 pieces of information answered his previous doubts. Mount Jade Dragon was also called Mount Kunlong. If one looked at it from above, Mount Jade Dragon looked like a dragon lying on the ground, and the surrounding mountains were like cages for this dragon. The dragon's head faced the outside of the 60,000 mountains as if it wanted to break free at any time. When it was close to evening, everyone finally arrived at the foot of Mount Jade Dragon. However, just as they reached the foot of the mountain, the winged cavalry warriors who were leading the way stopped. There seemed to be a little chaos at the front of the group, and there were noises coming from the front. A moment later, someone came to the Empress and reported, "Your Majesty, there are people blocking the way." The Empress was silent for a while before driving Qi Shui forward. Renbaqian followed behind on the Crow General and saw the person who made the entire group stop. It was a burly man in a green robe. He had a square face, an unkempt beard, and his hair was simply combed into a bun. He looked very different from ordinary aboriginals. His green robe was very clean, but it had turned white and looked very old. Upon closer inspection, this burly man was actually a little thin, but he had a big frame and gave off a strong feeling. Upon closer inspection, his green robe was a little empty, as if it was a size too big. More importantly, this man didn't have legs, and there was nothing under his robe. He was using 2 crutches to support his body. Even so, this man was just standing there calmly, but he had an indomitable aura that made people not dare to offend him. It was no wonder that the winged cavalry didn't dare to be rude and stopped to report to the Empress. Perhaps it had something to do with this man's identity. Renbachian guessed that this man was most likely his brother-in-law. The Empress sat on Qi Shui and looked at that man for a while with a complicated expression on her face. She softly said, "Elder brother." While the Empress was looking at him, the burly man was also looking at her. Upon hearing that the Empress was born, he smiled and said, "You have grown up." Elder brother is the language of those northern dogs, and it sounds distant. If you are willing, you can call me elder brother. The Empress opened her mouth, but ultimately couldn't bring herself to call him brother. Qi Ziding's expectant gaze dimmed as time passed. "If you don't want to call me that, then so be it." Qi Ziding sighed. He then looked at Renbachian and frowned. "Is this the husband you have chosen? Why is it a northern dog? Go back and choose another one. Let's bury him here." Upon hearing this, Renbachian felt a chill run down his spine. Following which, he became furious and sneered, ready to speak. He had never been the type of person to not retaliate when scolded. He had always believed that it was too late for a gentleman to take revenge, but he had to take revenge from morning to night. The Empress reached out to stop him. The complicated expression on her face was swept away and replaced with a layer of frost. She coldly said, "You don't need to ask about my affairs. I'm here to visit my mother and tell her some things. Finally, on account of our past relationship, I can tell you that he isn't from Great Xia, the Yun nation, or the Qin nation. If you touch a single hair on him, I will take your life." Qi Ziding was curious at first. He thought that Renbachian was from Great Xia or the Yun nation, but Qi Zixiao actually said that he wasn't. Could it be that there were other countries besides Dao, Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation? Then, he flew into a rage. Qi Ziding had lost both his legs and his figure was a little thin. However, his anger immediately made people feel depressed, like the gloominess before a storm. Finally, the anger on the burly man's face dissipated. He looked at Renbachian and then at the Empress before snorting, "You are rather dignified as an Empress. However, you are still far from it. Since you want to go up the mountain, come up. I have already prepared a place for you to stay." After saying that, the burly man slammed his crutches on the ground and flew toward the winged cavalry behind him. He opened his arms like a big bird in the air and landed on the mountain after a few leaps. "When you reach the mountain, stay with me and don't wander around alone," the Empress said to Renbachian after seeing that the burly man had disappeared. Renbachian responded and smacked his lips. This brother-in-law was giving him a show of strength the moment they met. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.